Please, somebody help me." The old man's voice cracked like something breaking that couldn't be fixed. Blood on his mouth, 4 of them standing over him. And every single person watching did exactly the same thing. Nothing. Ethan Walker was 18 years old, exhausted from a 10-hour shift, carrying a tire iron he'd forgotten to put back in the toolbox. He had exactly 2 seconds to make a choice that would change every life in that alley, including his own. If this story already has your heart pounding, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to our channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The heat in Kingman, Arizona that afternoon was the kind that pressed down on you like a hand. Not dramatic heat, just the ordinary, punishing kind that settles into a working day and makes everything slightly harder than it needs to be. Ethan Walker had been on his feet since 6 in the morning. 10 hours of grease and engine oil and scraped knuckles and the kind of silence that fills a small shop when business is slow, but bills are not. He was 18 years old, and he carried himself with the particular steadiness of someone who had been carrying things for a long time. He zipped his tool bag closed, wiped his hands on a shop rag that wasn't going to get any cleaner, and said goodbye to Mr. Castillo, the owner, a compact man in his 60s who had given Ethan the apprenticeship 8 months ago without asking for a resume. Just a handshake and a single question. "Can you show up every day and not complain?" Ethan had said yes. He'd meant it both times. The walk home was 40 minutes on foot. The truck he shared with his mother needed a water pump they couldn't yet afford. He didn't mind. He knew every crack in the sidewalk between the shop and their rental on Cayo Verde, knew which yards had dogs, which neighbors waved, which stretches of road pulled shade from the mesquite trees leaning over the fencing. He had walked this route so many times it had become its own kind of company. He was cutting behind an abandoned Texaco station, the shortcut that shaved 6 minutes off the walk when he heard the voice. "Come on, old man. You think that vest means something out here?" Laughter followed. The flat, ugly kind that has nothing funny in it. Ethan slowed. Something in the sound reached past his thinking and touched something older. He rounded the corner of the cinder block wall and stopped. 4 of them, late teens, maybe early 20s, 2 with phones out, recording. One with his boot pressed against the front wheel of a parked motorcycle, rocking it deliberately, the way you do when you're deciding whether to tip it over. The 4th was crouched in front of an older man who had been knocked to the ground and was trying, with considerable difficulty, to push himself back up. The older man was maybe 60, heavyset, gray-bearded. He was wearing a black leather vest covered in patches, the kind that had been earned over decades. His lip was split. His right palm was bleeding where it had caught the pavement. He was looking up at the one crouched in front of him with the particular expression of a person who has known real pain before, is not afraid of it, but understands the math of the current situation completely. "Please," the man said, not begging. More like giving them one last clean chance to walk away on their own terms. "Just let me stand up." The crouched one laughed and flicked the man's face with 2 fingers. Casual, contemptuous. "Nah, stay down there. You look better on the ground." Ethan looked left. There were people. A woman with grocery bags who had stopped on the sidewalk and gone very still. A teenage boy on a bicycle who had braked and was watching from 20 feet away, his feet flat on the ground. A man standing in the doorway of a laundromat, hands in his pockets, expression completely unreadable. Nobody moved. Nobody took a single step. The tire iron was in Ethan's right hand. He'd been using it to pry a stubborn rim off a wheel earlier that afternoon and had dropped it into his bag without thinking. It was 14 inches long, solid steel, weighed maybe 2 pounds. He hadn't planned on needing it. He felt something in his chest that he recognized. He'd felt it twice before in his life. Once when he'd pulled a younger kid out of the path of a car in middle school. Once when he'd stepped between his mother and a man she'd briefly dated who had made the serious mistake of raising his voice in her kitchen. That feeling wasn't fear, exactly. It was something more decisive than fear. It was the sensation of a choice being made by something deeper than the part of him that thought about consequences. He moved forward. Hey, his own voice surprised him. Steady, louder than he'd expected, carrying. All four of them looked up. Back up. He kept walking toward them, the tire iron loose in his right hand, not raised, just there. Present. All of you, back up right now. For 1 second, maybe two, nobody moved. The one crouched in front of the old man stood. The one with his boot on the motorcycle wheel straightened slowly. The two with phones looked at each other with the particular uncertainty of people who expected a script and just got something off script. The one who stood was bigger than Ethan, broader across the shoulders. He had the look of someone who had learned early that his size was usually sufficient to end conversations before they developed into anything serious. Kid, he said, letting the word carry the full weight of condescension he intended. You have absolutely no idea what you just walked into. I don't need to, Ethan said. He was close now. Close enough that stepping back would have been noticed by everyone. He looked directly at the man standing nearest to the old biker. Help him up. I'm not asking twice. What happened next took less than 6 seconds. The big one stepped toward Ethan. Not a hesitation. A commitment. The kind that expected the other person to flinch first. Ethan didn't flinch. He moved hard to the left, faster than the other man was tracking, and brought the tire iron flat across the outside of the man's right knee. Not a breaking blow. A stopping blow. Enough to buckle the leg, send the man sideways, take him off his feet, without putting him in the hospital. Controlled. Deliberate. The difference between someone who is panicking and someone who has already decided what they're going to do before the other person finishes deciding. The other three hesitated. That microsecond of collective uncertainty that happens when the person they fully expected to run does the exact opposite. Ethan turned and found the eyes of the one nearest the old biker. He held them. Pick up his phone, Ethan said to the old man, without looking away from the three still standing. His voice was flat, completely calm, the kind of calm that is more frightening than anger because anger has edges you can read. And get up, I've got you. The old man moved, slow, favoring his right knee, but up in seconds. He reached down and picked up a phone that had been knocked from his hand when they'd first shoved him. The big one was trying to get back to his feet, face red, one hand braced on the pavement. But the ringleader, the one who had been crouching, the one who had flicked the old man's face, was looking at Ethan differently now. Not with rage, with something more calculating. He was reading Ethan the way a person reads a situation when they realize it has shifted completely out of their favor and they need to decide fast. Whatever he saw in Ethan's face settled it. Not worth it, the ringleader said quietly. He took one step back, then another. He looked at the other two with phones. Come on. They went. Not running. That careful, controlled speed of people who want very badly to appear as though they're not leaving in a hurry, even though everyone watching knows exactly what it is. In under 30 seconds, they rounded the corner and were gone. Ethan stood with the tire iron still in his hand. He watched the corner until he was certain they weren't doubling back. Then he lowered his arm. He turned to the old man and took a real, unhurried look at him. The man was dusting off his vest with one hand. The patches were numerous and old, worn soft at the edges, in the way things get when they've been through weather and time and meant something the whole time. There was a name tag on the front. The man caught him looking. Jack, the man said. His voice was gravel and smoke, but underneath it, something warmer than either of those things. Friends call me Iron Jack. Are you all right? Ethan asked. Your lip is still bleeding. I've had worse. The man ran his tongue over the split and nodded toward the motorcycle. Help me check the bike. They walked to it together. Ethan ran his hands over the frame, checked the front fork, crouched to examine the tire. Nothing structural. The mirrors had been knocked out of alignment. He straightened them, checked the adjustment, straightened them again. You ride? The old man asked. No, I work on them. Castillo's shop over on the Route 66 extension. The old man's eyebrows lifted slightly. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. I know that shop, he paused. Good work there. Thank you. A moment passed between them. Ethan was still watching the corner where the four had disappeared. The woman with the grocery bags had walked away. The boy on the bicycle was gone. The man at the laundromat door had gone back inside. The sidewalk looked exactly as it had looked before any of this happened, which struck Ethan as the strangest part of all of it. "You didn't have to do that," Iron Jack said finally. "I know," Ethan said. "Most people don't." The old man looked at him. Not the way a stranger looks at someone who just helped him. Something more deliberate than that. The way a person looks when they are trying to understand something that genuinely surprised them and they want to get it right. "What's your name, son?" "Ethan." "Ethan Walker." "You live around here?" "Cayo Verde." "About 40 minutes that way." He gestured. "You walked here from the shop, trucks down." Jack nodded slowly. Like this confirmed something. Confirmed something. He mounted the motorcycle with some effort. The right knee was clearly bothering him more than he was letting on, and looked at Ethan one more time from the seat. "You ever need anything?" "Ethan Walker," he said. "You look for Iron Jack." "Anyone in this town can find me." Ethan nodded. He wasn't sure what to do with that exactly. So he said what seemed right. "Take care of that lip." The old man made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a grunt, neither quite arriving, and rolled the motorcycle out of the vacant lot and onto the street. Ethan watched him go. He stood there alone for a moment in the empty lot with the tire irons still in his hand, the late afternoon pressing down, the corner still empty where the four had gone. Then he put the tire iron in his bag and started walking home. He did not tell his mother what happened. He came in, washed his hands at the kitchen sink, ate the beans and rice she'd made, asked about her appointment with the specialist at the end of the month, and listened. She talked about the bills, about the new medication, about the neighbor, Mrs. Peralta, who kept offering to drive her places when Ethan was at work, which she appreciated but also felt guilty about. Ethan told her not to feel guilty. He said he'd figure out the money situation. He always said that. She always knew he meant it. After dinner, he sat on the back steps for a while, watching the last of the daylight pull itself out of the sky, and he thought about the expression on the old man's face in those 2 seconds before Ethan had moved. The split lip and the bleeding palm, the particular way a person looks when they've done the math and don't like the answer. He thought about the ringleader's voice saying not worth it and walking away like it had been his decision all along. He thought about how thin that moment had been, how many ways it could have gone wrong. He picked up his phone and almost texted his friend Marcus about it. He put the phone back down. It was the kind of story that changed shape in a text message. Either it got bigger than it was or smaller. Neither felt right. He went inside. He went to sleep. He did not think about it again in the morning. The next morning was the same as every other morning. At the shop by 6, Mr. Castillo had 2 bikes waiting, a 2019 Harley Softail with brake issues and a vintage Indian that belonged to a collector down in Phoenix, who had trailered it up with very specific and detailed written instructions. Ethan started with the Harley. Around 9, a woman he didn't recognize came to the shop door, stood there for a moment before coming in. She was in her 40s, professional looking, asked a few questions about mechanic recommendations, looked around briefly, and left. Ethan didn't think twice about it. Around 11, a man came in asking about tires for a model Ethan had never heard of, asking questions that didn't quite add up to a real purchasing decision. He left without buying anything. Again, Ethan filed it away as nothing. At 12:30, he was eating lunch on the bench outside the front of the shop when a truck he didn't recognize drove slowly past. He watched it the way you watch something moving slower than it should. He decided it was probably looking for an address. He went back to his sandwich. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that the woman had made 2 phone calls before she'd reached the parking lot. That the man asking about tires had taken a careful, unhurried look at the shop's equipment and written something down in a small notebook. That the truck had passed the shop twice before he came out for lunch. That all 3 of these people had been sent 240 miles away, in a building that smelled of motor oil and decades of serious use. A phone call was ending. A man set down the receiver, not a cell phone, an actual landline, worn smooth from years of use, and leaned back in his chair. His name was Jack Mercer, Iron Jack, chapter president of one of the most established motorcycle clubs in the American Southwest. A man who had spent 4 decades building something that wasn't just a club. It was a code, a way of measuring the world and the people in it. He had a split lip and a wrapped right hand from the previous afternoon. Across the table from him sat 3 other men, all older, all watching him with the same focused, patient stillness. "Tell me what they found," Jack said. The man to his left, Dale, compact, sunburned, the one who handled the details, set a notepad on the table. 18 years old, lives with his mother, single parent. She's been managing a chronic health condition for the past 5 years. Ongoing medical expenses, ongoing gaps in coverage. He looked at the next line. He's been at Castillo's shop 8 months, 60+ hours most weeks. No record, no incidents. What else? Neighbors say he fixes cars for free on weekends. Says he's just practicing. Dale turned a page. We talked to a Mrs. Peralta on Cayo Verde. Lives 2 doors down. She says the Walker kid has been buying her groceries about twice a month for the past 6 months. He paused. She thought it was coming from a church charity for 4 months before she figured out it was him. The room went quiet. He buy them with his own money? Jack asked. Checked his hours against his paycheck, against the store receipts. Yeah, his own money. Jack's jaw moved, not quite a reaction. Something more restrained than a reaction. He's turned down help twice, said the tall, weathered man named Roy from the other end of the table. Once from a local assistance program, once from an outreach connected to his mother's medical team. Both times he said there were other families who needed it more. The table stayed quiet. And he hasn't told anyone what happened yesterday, Jack said. It wasn't a question. Not his mother, Dale said. Not his friend Marcus. We got an overview from Marcus's cousin. Not his boss. Nobody. Jack sat with that. Roy leaned forward. Jack, what are you thinking? I'm thinking, Jack said slowly, that the 6 seconds weren't about yesterday. Nobody asked him to explain. They already understood. The 6 seconds, the moment Ethan Walker moved when no one else would, when every person within line of sight made a different calculation, were not an aberration. They were not some out-of-character moment of extraordinary courage from an otherwise ordinary young man. They were the most recent, most visible expression of something that had been running through that kid his entire life. The groceries for the old woman, the free repairs, the turned-down charity, the 60-hour weeks without complaint. Every one of those things was the same choice, made the same way, in the dark, when no camera was there to catch it. The 6 seconds were just the moment the camera happened to be pointing. Who has the footage? Jack asked. 2 of them were recording, Dale said. We tracked one of the accounts. He posted it last night. It has about 12,000 views right now and climbing. How long before it gets picked up? Roy asked. Could be hours, Dale said. Could be less. Jack nodded. He stood. He was not a dramatic man. He didn't make speeches when a decision was already clear. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at the 3 men across from him. Get the word out, he said, to every chapter in range. And I need a number. How many riders can be in Kingman in 72 hours? Roy pulled out his phone. Give me 20 minutes. Dale was already reaching for his. And I want everything on that shop, Jack said. Castillo's. What they do, what they need, what condition they're in. Full picture. He walked to the door and stopped, turned back. One more thing. He looked at Dale. Don't let anyone approach the boy directly. Not yet. He doesn't know we're watching, and I don't want him to feel like he's being investigated. He hasn't done anything wrong. A pause. This needs to feel right when the moment comes. It needs to be earned. Understood, Dale said. Jack walked out. Behind him, the 2 phones were already in use, already beginning to move the gears of something that would, within 72 hours, bring the streets of a small Arizona city to a complete and astonished standstill. In the shop on the Route 66 extension, Ethan Walker was torquing a brake caliper to spec. He was thinking about nothing except the job in front of him. He didn't feel the future arriving. He never did. That evening, he stopped at the corner store on the way home. He bought a small bag of rice, a can of black beans, 2 avocados, and a bar of dark chocolate he'd give his mother because she liked it with her evening tea. He paid with cash and counted the change. Outside the store, he passed Mrs. Peralta's house and noticed that her porch light was out. He made a note to himself to replace the bulb this week before she tripped on the steps at night. He went home. He did not look at social media. He had no idea that while he was buying avocados and noting a burned-out porch light, the video from behind the abandoned Texaco station was passing 20,000 views, then 50. Then beginning to move the way these things move slowly, and then all at once. The video hit 100,000 views sometime around 2 in the morning, while Ethan Walker slept through all of it completely. He found out the way he found out about most things, too late and from someone else. Marcus texted him at 7:14 the next morning, before Ethan had finished lacing his boots. 4 words and a link. "Bro, is this you?" Ethan clicked the link. He watched himself for 31 seconds. That was the length of the clip. 31 seconds of shaky vertical phone footage that started mid-action, caught the moment he rounded the cinder block wall, showed the tire iron coming out, showed the big one going down, showed the ringleader taking one long look at Ethan's face and making his decision, showed the old man getting to his feet. Then it cut. Ethan put the phone down on the kitchen table. He sat with it for a moment. His mother was still asleep. The coffee maker was running. Through the thin wall of the rental house, he could hear Mrs. Peralta's radio playing something faint in Spanish. He typed back, "Yeah, don't share it." Marcus responded in 11 seconds. "Ethan, it has 140,000 views." Ethan stared at that number. 140,000. He had never in his life produced anything that 140,000 people had seen. It didn't feel real. It felt like a number attached to something that had happened to someone else in a different city, in a different version of that afternoon. He put the phone in his pocket and went to work. Mr. Castillo was standing at the front of the shop when Ethan arrived. That was unusual. Castillo was typically in the back by this hour, already under something, already with grease on his hands. He was standing at the front with his arms crossed, and an expression Ethan could not immediately read. "You want to tell me something?" Castillo said. "About what?" Castillo held up his phone. Same clip, different account. Someone had reposted it. The view counter on this version read 280,000. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. It was on the way home. "I didn't plan it." "I'm not asking if you planned it." Castillo looked at him steadily. "I'm asking why you didn't tell me, because it didn't seem like something to tell." Castillo was quiet for a long moment. Then he lowered the phone. He nodded, that slow, private kind of nod that means a person has just received the answer they were expecting, and it confirmed something they already believed. "Okay," Castillo said. "Get to work. The Indian needs the carburetor finished before noon." That was the end of it between the two of them. It was not the end of it anywhere else. By 10 o'clock, 2 local news vans had parked in front of the shop. By 10:30, a reporter Ethan didn't recognize was at the door asking if he had a few minutes. Ethan said no. Castillo stood behind him and said it more firmly. The reporter left a card. By 11, the view count on the original post had passed 500,000. Ethan knew this because Marcus would not stop texting. He finally silenced his phone, placed its screen down on the workbench, and went back to the carburetor. What he could not see from inside the shop was the shape of what was already assembling itself around him. Not in Kingman, not yet, but across the state, across several states, in parking lots and clubhouses and back rooms of shops that smelled like his own shop oil and metal, and worn rubber men were looking at their phones and then looking at each other. One of those men was Roy. Roy had been riding with Jack Mercer for 22 years. He was not a man given to quick emotional responses. His face had the settled quality of someone who had processed most of his feelings long enough ago that what remained was simply judgment. But he'd watched the clip 4 times that morning. And when he watched it the 4th time, he watched it the same way he watched it the first time. That meant something. He was on the phone with Jack by 8. "It's moving fast," Roy said. How fast? The original account posted it at 11 last night. It's been picked up by he checked his screen 6 major reposts. One of those alone has 180,000. There's a woman in Texas, 2 million followers. She stitched it 40 minutes ago with commentary. Her version already has 400,000. Jack said nothing for a moment. Roy could hear him breathing steadily on the other end of the line. Where are we on the writer count? I've got confirmed commitments from 4 chapters. We're looking at Roy, checked the notepad, around 250, 260. Could push 300 if the Flagstaff group comes in full. Tell them to come in full. Jack, that's a lot of bikes in a small city. I know what it is, Jack said. That's the point. Roy didn't argue. He'd been riding with this man long enough to know when the decision was already made. What's the timeline? Day after tomorrow. Late morning. I want it to be a work day. I want people to be out. A pause. The shop is on the Route 66 extension, straight approach from the west. We can stage in the industrial area a mile out and roll in together. Do it clean, Jack said. No chaos, no aggression. When we pull up, everyone stops. Engines off. That's the image. That's what I want that kid to walk out to. Roy wrote it down. Then Jack said, I'm going to stand in front of cameras and tell the truth. About what happened in that lot. About what that kid did. About what we found when we looked into who he actually is. He paused. People need to hear this kind of story right now. Not because it's unusual, but because they've forgotten it's possible. Roy looked at the ceiling for a moment. He was thinking about a version of himself from 30 years ago. A version that had needed, badly, someone to look at him the way Jack intended to look at Ethan Walker. He's not going to know what hit him, Roy said. Good, Jack said. It should feel that way. The real things always do. Inside the shop, Ethan had finished the carburetor and moved on to a set of brake lines. His phone had collected 11 more texts from Marcus, 2 voicemails from numbers he didn't recognize, and a missed call from a Phoenix area code. He looked up the area code. He ignored all of it. At one point, Castillo came to the door of the back room and leaned against the frame. You eating lunch, Castillo asked in a few minutes. A silence settled. Then Castillo said, My daughter called me this morning. Ethan looked up. She lives in Tucson. She called to ask if the mechanic in the video worked for me. He paused. I told her yes. Ethan waited, she cried, Castillo said. Simply, without decoration. He straightened off the door frame and walked back to the front. Ethan sat with that for a moment. Then he went back to the brake lines. The afternoon brought 2 more news vehicles, a city councilman who came in person and left without getting a statement, and a phone call to the shop's landline from a producer in Los Angeles. Castillo handled the calls. Ethan worked. By 4 o'clock, the original clip had 800,000 views. By the time Ethan was locking up, someone told him a man who had come to pick up a bike and couldn't help mentioning it that the number had crossed 1 million. He walked home, same 40 minutes, same streets. He stopped at the corner store. He did not buy groceries for Mrs. Peralta this time because he'd done it 3 days ago and she still had plenty. He bought rice and a can of tomatoes and walked the rest of the way in the cooling evening air. His mother was at the kitchen table when he came in. She had her phone face up in front of her, and on it was the clip, paused at the moment Ethan was walking toward the 4 of them. She had the careful, suspended expression of a woman who was waiting to fully understand something before allowing herself to react to it. She turned the phone around. Maria from the clinic sent this to me, she said. She said, it's you. It's me. She was quiet. He could see the effort it took her not to immediately fill the silence. Are you all right? She asked. I'm fine. Nobody touched me, that man. Those 4 boys, they could have didn't. Ethan. Her voice reached the place past composure. I need you to not do things like this without telling me. I know. I'm sorry. Are you? She looked at him, not angry. Something more complicated. Because I know you. And if it happened again tomorrow, you'd do the exact same thing. He looked at the table. Yeah, he said, probably. She made a sound half-breath, half something that hadn't decided yet what it was, and stood up and went to the stove. He understood that the conversation was both over and also just beginning. that they would come back to it, the way mothers and sons circle back to the things that frighten them most about each other. "I'll cook," he said. "I already started." He stood next to her and didn't say anything else for a while, and that was all right. That night, lying in the dark, he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He searched his own name. He typed Ethan Walker Kingman Biker into his phone and let it load. The results took his breath away. Not because of the numbers. Though the numbers were staggering, the original post passed 2 million. The Texas woman's stitch passed 800,000. A news article from a Phoenix outlet with his name in the headline. What took his breath was the comments. Hundreds of them. Thousands. People writing from places he'd never been, places he could barely picture. Minnesota, rural Georgia, suburban Ohio. People saying things about him that he had no framework to receive. "This is what a real man looks like. My son is 17. I showed him this video tonight. I drove past someone who needed help last week and kept going. I've thought about it every single day since. This kid is better than me." He put the phone face down on his chest and looked at the ceiling. He was 18 years old. He worked 60 hours a week. He couldn't afford to fix his truck. He bought groceries for an old woman and told himself it was just practice for the day when he could afford to do more. He had done what he did behind the gas station because the alternative, standing there and watching, was something his body apparently was not built to do. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like himself. The gap between those two things was wide and disorienting, and he could not fall asleep inside it. He was still awake at midnight when Marcus texted again. "Dude, there's a news truck outside your house." He went to the window. There was. He went back to bed. There was nothing to do about it tonight. 240 miles away, at roughly the same hour, Dale was sitting in front of 3 laptops with a cold cup of coffee and a legal pad covered in handwriting. He was going through everything, every account that had posted the video, every major share, every comment thread that Ethan Walker by name. He was building a picture, not of the story the internet was telling, of the story underneath that story, the one only visible to someone paying exactly the right kind of attention. He called Roy at 12:40. "Roy, I found something." "What kind of something?" "About 8 months ago, before Ethan started at Castillo's, he applied for a job at a bigger shop across town. Better pay, better hours, closer to his house. They offered it to him. He turned it down." Roy paused. Why? Castillo's apprenticeship had come through a week earlier. Lower pay, longer hours, farther from home. But Castillo had given an apprenticeship 2 years before that to a kid with a record, a drug history that would have closed every other door in town. Nobody else would touch him. That kid turned it into something real. He's in his 20s now, doing well in Tucson. Dale looked at his notepad. Ethan found that out. Decided that was the kind of shop he wanted to work in. Turned down the better job. The line was quiet for a long moment. "Did Jack ask you to find this?" Roy said. "No, I found it on my own. Tell him in the morning I will." Dale closed one of the laptops. He sat back and looked out the window at the eastern edge of the sky, which was just beginning to give up its darkest black for something slightly lighter. "Roy, this kid has been doing the right thing in places nobody was watching for a long time. The video is just the tip of it." "Yeah," Roy said quietly. "I know. Jack knows. That's why we're going." Dale thought about something Jack had said when they'd first started discussing Ethan before the rider count, before the logistics, before the phone started ringing across 4 chapters. Jack had said, "The hardest thing to find in the world is a person who does good because it's the only thing that makes sense to them, not for credit, not for leverage, not because someone is watching, just because they can't do anything else." Dale had asked, "You think he's really like that?" And Jack had said, "I was there. I was on the ground. I looked up and I saw his face in the moment before he moved." He wasn't brave. Brave is when you're scared and you move anyway. He wasn't scared. He was just there. Already decided. Dale had been thinking about those words for 2 days. He thought about them again now. Outside, the sky continued its slow change. Somewhere in Kingman, Ethan Walker was awake, staring at his ceiling, trying to understand why 2 million people were talking about a choice that to him had never felt like a choice at all. And somewhere in the logistics of an Arizona morning, 300 motorcycles were preparing to move. Ethan heard them before he saw them. He was under the Indian, torquing a fitting on the rebuilt carburetor when the sound reached him, low at first. The kind of rumble you feel in your sternum before your ears fully register it. He thought it was a truck. Then he thought it was several trucks. Then he put down the wrench and stood up because the sound was wrong for trucks. Too even, too rhythmic. Too many individual engines finding the same pulse at the same time, the way a crowd finds the same breath when something enormous is about to happen. Castillo appeared in the doorway, connecting the front of the shop to the... He had his phone in his hand, and his face had the look of a man who had just understood something 5 seconds ahead of everyone else in the room. Ethan, I hear it. I need you to come to the front. I'm in the middle of Ethan. Castillo's voice was quiet, but it had a weight to it that Ethan had only heard a handful of times in 8 months. Come to the front now. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and followed the older man through the door. Through the front windows, he could see that the people on the sidewalk had stopped moving. A woman with a stroller had turned to face the direction of the sound. A man walking a dog had gone completely still. Even the dog was sitting, ears forward, reading something in the air that its owner hadn't fully processed yet. Then the first motorcycle came around the corner. Then the second. Then they kept coming. They came in tight formation, 2 across, measured and controlled. Not a parade, not a procession. Something more deliberate than either of those words. Every rider in leather, most of them gray-haired or white-haired. The kind of men whose faces had been shaped by decades of weather and decision and a particular way of moving through the world. They came through the street with the contained, organized energy of something that had been planned down to the last detail and was now executing exactly as intended. Ethan stood at the front window and started counting. He stopped at 30 and realized counting was useless. How many? He said. It came out barely above a whisper. Castillo was standing beside him, arms crossed, chin up, reading the patches. I count 3, maybe 4 chapters worth, he said quietly. Could be 250. Could be more. They kept coming. The sound was immense, not chaotic, organized, deep. The kind of sound that doesn't just fill a space but occupies it, gets into your chest cavity, and sets up residence there. People were coming out of every business on the block. The laundromat, the insurance office, the taqueria next door. A woman leaned out of a second-floor apartment window. 2 teenage boys appeared on the roof of the building across the street. Phones already out, already recording. And then, one by one, they stopped. The engines cut. One first, then another, rippling backward through the formation, the way sound travels across water when you drop something into it. The rumble dying in sections until the last engine went quiet somewhere down the block. And the silence that replaced it was so complete and so sudden that Ethan could hear the woman with the stroller saying something soft to her child. He could hear his own breathing. 300 riders, standing, silent, waiting. Ethan's mouth had gone dry. His hands were still holding the shop rag. He realized he was gripping it. Castillo turned to him and said, without any drama at all, I think they're here for you. For one completely irrational moment, a moment Ethan would never tell anyone about. Not even Marcus. He almost said he wasn't ready. Almost said he needed a minute. He looked down at himself. Grease under the nails. A small burn mark on his left forearm from a pipe fitting 3 days ago. Gray t-shirt, jeans. Boots that had seen 2 years of serious use. He had not shaved in 3 days. He walked out the door. The street pressed against him from all sides. The particular silence of 300 people collectively deciding not to make a sound has a physical quality. It has weight. Ethan had never felt anything like it. He straightened without thinking about it, stood to his full height, looked out at the formation, and felt, for one vertiginous second, completely alone in the center of something enormous. Then a figure moved through the riders from somewhere near the middle of the formation. People parted without being asked, the way water moves around something solid. He walked with a slight catch in his right knee, the same knee Ethan had noticed in the vacant lot 2 days ago. His gray beard, his dark eyes, the leather vest with its worn, earned patches. The split in his lip had already begun to heal, gone from open wound to bruised line. Iron Jack walked until he was standing 10 feet from Ethan on the sidewalk. The two of them looked at each other. "You remember me," Jack said. "I remember you," Ethan said. "You didn't tell anyone, not a question." Ethan shook his head slightly. Didn't seem something to tell. Something moved across Jack's face. Not a smile. Deeper than a smile. The expression of a man who has been looking for something for a long time and has just confirmed that he found it. He turned and looked at the formation behind him. At the riders. The bikes, the street that had been transformed in the last 5 minutes into something that had no business existing on an ordinary Wednesday morning. Then he turned back to Ethan. "My name is Jack Mercer," he said. His voice was pitched to carry. A news crew had positioned itself to his left. A second camera was moving up the sidewalk. "Most people here know me as Iron Jack. I've been riding for 40 years. I've been with my club for 35. He paused. "And 2 days ago, 4 men knocked me to the ground in a vacant lot 2 blocks from here. Not one person who saw it happen did a single thing. The street was silent. Except one." He pointed at Ethan. Not a dramatic gesture, a direct one. The kind of point you use when something is simply and factually true. This young man, Jack said, walked into a situation that everyone else walked away from. He had a tire iron in his hand. He was 18 years old. He was on his way home from a 10-hour shift. He didn't know me. He had no reason to help me, and he moved before I even finished asking. Ethan's jaw was tight. He was looking at Jack. He was aware of the cameras the way you're aware of something peripheral when all your real attention is somewhere else entirely. After it was over, Jack continued, he helped me check my bike. He told me to take care of my lip. He walked home. And he didn't mention it to a single person. A murmur moved through the rider's low, like something settling. I've been in this life long enough to know what character looks like. And I've been around long enough to know how rare it is to find it this consistent in someone this young. He looked back at Ethan, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped still audible, but aimed. We did our homework, son. We know about the groceries. We know about the cars you fixed for free. We know you turned down 2 assistance programs because you thought other families needed it more. We know you took the harder job because you respected the kind of man running the better one. Ethan's chest was doing something complicated. He kept his face still through a deliberate act of will he hadn't needed to use in a long time. I'm not here to embarrass you, Jack said. Quiet now. Meant for Ethan, not the cameras, even if the microphones caught every word. I'm here because my people don't walk away from debts. And I'm here because this city needed to see you, not on a phone screen. Right here. He extended his hand. Ethan took it. The moment their hands met, something broke loose in the crowd gathered on the sidewalks. Not the riders, they maintained their stillness, but the civilians. The people from the taqueria and the laundromat and the insurance office and the apartment windows. A sound came up from them that was not quite cheering and not quite applause. It was something rarer than either. The kind of sound that comes out of people when something happens that they have been, without knowing it, waiting a very long time to see. Ethan shook Jack's hand. Then, because he didn't know what else to do, and because his eyes had gone embarrassingly wet, he pulled the older man forward and held on for a second. Jack's hand came up and gripped the back of Ethan's shoulder and stayed there, solid and certain. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Jack pulled back and looked at him. You good? Yeah. Ethan's voice was even, just barely. Yeah, I'm good. What Ethan didn't know, what nobody on that sidewalk knew, except Jack and the men who had planned it, was that a production crew had been given access to the rooftop of the building across the street before the riders arrived. Wide-angle shot of the entire formation. Close angle on Ethan's face. Audio from 2 wireless microphones placed with the consent of a city official who had been quietly briefed the previous evening. The footage of the handshake, Ethan's face in the moment Jack pointed at him. The way he pulled the older man in, the grip on the shoulder, all of it would be edited into a 4-minute clip and posted within the hour. It would reach 1 million views in 40 minutes. It would reach 10 million by midnight. It would be picked up by every major network by the following morning. But that was all still coming. Right now, on the sidewalk in front of Castillo's shop, on the Route 66 extension, Ethan Walker was trying to hold himself together in front of 300 bikers and his own boss and a growing crowd of strangers who had stopped whatever they were doing because the sound of engines had told them something important was happening. A woman in the crowd was crying. Ethan noticed her peripherally middle-aged work clothes had come out of the laundromat. She wasn't making a scene of it, just standing with tears running down her face, watching. When Ethan's gaze passed over her, she didn't look away. She held his eyes for a moment with the quiet, direct look of someone who has been waiting to say something they don't have words for. He thought about the comments from the night before. Where are people like this in my city? And here was this woman, a stranger, crying on a sidewalk in the middle of a Wednesday because she'd witnessed something that cost her something to see. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he felt the weight of it. Jack had turned to the nearest news camera. A reporter moved in with a microphone. "Mr. Mercer, can you tell us?" "I can tell you whatever you need," Jack said. His voice had shifted back into its public register. Controlled, authoritative. "But first I want that footage played. The footage from the vacant lot." He looked toward the street. "I was told there's a screen." Ethan turned. A flatbed truck had been positioned up the block with a large monitor mounted on its bed. He had not noticed it arrive. A technician was running a cable. Then the screen came on. The clip from behind the Texaco station played at full street volume. Ethan watched himself for 31 seconds. In front of 300 bikers, in front of a crowd that had grown in the time they'd been standing there to somewhere over 200 civilians. He watched the tire iron. He watched his own face grim, focused, not angry, just completely committed to what was already in motion. He watched himself tell the old man to get up without looking away from the other three. He had not liked watching it on his phone. He liked it considerably less this way. "That's the kid who stepped up," Jack was telling the reporter. Ethan Walker, 18 years old, worked 60 hours a week in that shop right there. He nodded at Castillo's. "The people who didn't step up, I don't blame them. Fear is real. Self-preservation is human. But this young man wasn't operating from the same set of choices that most of us operate from. He moved before his brain could tell him not to. "What does this mean for you personally?" the reporter asked. "It means I have a debt," Jack said, "and I intend to pay it." He turned back to Ethan. "Your boss know you're standing out here?" Ethan glanced back. Castillo was in the shop doorway, arms folded, not smiling exactly, but something close to it. Something that only showed up on Castillo's face on very specific occasions. "I think he's all right with it," Ethan said. "Good." Jack looked at him steadily. "Because I have some things I'd rather say without a camera in my face. But I wanted to do this first in public so there's no confusion about what my community thinks of what you did." He raised his voice. Not theatrical, just carrying. "This man is a friend of the Hells Angels." From the formation behind him, the riders responded. Not with sound, with movement. A synchronized ripple from the front of the formation to the back, every one of them raising one fist. It took about 4 seconds to travel the full length of the street. Ethan stood and watched it travel. He would spend years trying to describe what that felt like. The closest he ever got was this. It felt like something that had been holding its breath for a very long time finally let it out. His phone was ringing in his pocket. He already knew it was his mother. Marcus appeared at the edge of the crowd. He'd come from wherever Marcus went, on Wednesday mornings apparently on foot, slightly out of breath, wearing a shirt with a hole in the collar. He pushed through to the front and stood next to Ethan and stared at the formation, and then at Ethan and said with complete sincerity, "What is happening right now?" "I don't entirely know," Ethan said. Are they all here for?" "Yeah." Marcus looked at the formation again. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I told you to call me when something interesting happened. Marcus, I've been your friend for 7 years and this is the first time. Yeah, shut up. But Marcus was grinning. The real kind, the kind that reaches all the way up. He put his hand on Ethan's shoulder briefly before dropping it. I'm just saying. The cameras were still running. The riders hadn't moved. Jack was speaking to the reporter. Again, Ethan caught fragments. Community. Character. The kind of investment that pays forward for a generation. The reporter asked about the 4 men from the lot. Jack's answer was measured. Law enforcement had been notified. The footage had been submitted. That process would proceed the way such processes did. That was not what today was about. Then Ethan's phone rang again. He stepped away from the crowd far enough to hear. His mother, he answered. Mom, I'm watching the news. Her voice was raw, not the careful composure from last night. Something had broken through completely. Ethan, I'm watching the news right now, and there are 300 motorcycles on your street. I know. I can see them. She stopped. Are you crying? No. He moved the phone slightly away from his face. I'm at work. I'm fine. You do not sound fine, Mom, Ethan. And now she wasn't holding it anymore. He could hear her crying on the other end, not loudly. The quiet, exhausted kind of crying that comes from a mother who has spent too many years holding too many things together alone and has just been confronted with the sight of the world moving for once, clearly, unmistakably in her son's direction. You never told me about the man in the lot. You never said a single word. It didn't feel important. It is important. You are important. Her voice strengthened even through the tears. I need you to know that I know that, even when I don't say it enough. You are the most important thing in my life. And I need you to not get yourself killed, helping strangers with a tire iron. He almost laughed. Okay, I mean it. I know you mean it. He looked at the formation. 300 motorcycles standing in silence on his street, on a Wednesday in a city that would be talking about this morning for a very long time. But I'm also, she stopped again. I'm so proud of you, she said. I am so proud of you that I can barely stand up right now. He was quiet for a moment. Come down here, he said. As soon as you can. Borrow Mrs. Peralta's car if she'll lend it. I want you to see this. She said she would. He hung up. He turned back to the street. Jack had finished with the reporter and was watching him from 20 feet away with the patient, settled expression of a man who has time and knows exactly how to use it. Ethan walked back to him. You good? Jack said. My mom's coming. Jack nodded slowly. Good. I want to meet her. Ethan looked at him. Why? Because any woman who raised you, Jack said, without any performance in it at all, in the circumstances you were raised in, is someone worth knowing. Ethan had no answer for that. He looked at the ground for a moment and then back up. What happens now? Now, Jack said, we wait for your mother. Then we go somewhere quieter. And then I'm going to make you an offer. He paused. You can say no. I want to be clear about that up front. Whatever I put on the table, you can walk away from it. And I'll still consider the debt paid, and you'll still be a friend of mine for the rest of my life. But you'd rather I didn't say no, Ethan said. The corner of Jack's mouth moved. The closest thing to a smile the man apparently produced. Kid, he said, I've been looking for someone like you for a long time. Sandra Walker arrived 40 minutes later in Mrs. Peralta's old Buick, still warm from the driveway. When she stepped out and saw the motorcycles still there, still lined up, the riders who had not left standing in loose groups, talking quietly among themselves, she put her hand over her mouth and went very still. Ethan was at the car before she'd taken 2 steps. Mom. She grabbed him by both arms and looked at him the way mothers look at their children when they need to confirm with their own eyes that the person is intact. Then she pulled him in and held on. She was a small woman. She barely reached his chin. She held on anyway. You're okay, she said into his shoulder. Not a question. A statement she was making true by saying it out loud. I'm completely okay. She pulled back and looked at the street, at the riders, the cameras, the crowd that had thinned but not gone, the way crowds do when something is technically over, but nobody wants to be the first to admit it. Her eyes moved through all of it and settled on Jack, standing with Roy and Dale 20 feet away, deliberately not looking at them, giving them space, she said. Ethan nodded toward Jack. Sandra looked at Jack Mercer for a long, unhurried moment. She took in the vest, the gray beard, the wrapped hand, the posture of a man who was accustomed to being the heaviest thing in any room he entered. Then she straightened her own shoulders, that particular squaring up that Ethan had watched his entire life. The full self posture, the one that meant she was about to walk into something that required everything she had. Take me to him, she said. They crossed the sidewalk. Jack saw them coming and turned. He looked at Sandra Walker with a directness that was not aggressive, simply attentive, the way a person looks when they are genuinely trying to see someone, not just observe them. Mrs. Walker, he said. He didn't offer his hand. He waited. Sandra looked at him steadily. Your lip is healing, it is. My son did that. Got you back on your feet. He did. She nodded slowly. I've been trying to get him to slow down and let someone else handle things for about 15 years. She held Jack's eyes. It hasn't worked yet. A pause. I saw what you did today. What you said about him. I said what was true. You said more than that. Her voice was even, precise. You said he was worth something. In front of cameras. In front of all these people. She stopped for a moment. He's always been worth something. I've known that since he was 3 years old. But hearing someone else say it, she stopped again. It matters. Whether it should or not. It matters. Jack looked at her for a moment. Then carefully, he said, You raised him right, ma'am. And you raised him alone. And that's not nothing. Sandra held his gaze. Then she nodded, once accepting the statement as fact, not compliment, and looked at Ethan. All right, what happens now? That was the question. And the answer to it, the real answer, the full one, was waiting 12 miles outside of Kingman, in a building that Jack had been running for 19 years. They rode there in Roy's truck. Ethan and Sandra in the back, Jack in the passenger seat, Roy driving. Castillo had closed the shop for the afternoon, something Ethan had never once seen him do on a weekday, and was following in his own vehicle. The convoy of riders had dispersed with the same organized quiet with which they'd arrived, breaking into smaller groups and heading in different directions. The street returning to itself in under 10 minutes, as though 300 motorcycles had simply decided to unmake what they had made, leaving the ordinary world behind without a scar. The building was industrial from the outside, a former manufacturing space Jack had purchased 2 decades ago and rebuilt over years, with his own hands and the hands of people who believed in what he was building. Once you walked through the door, the difference between what it looked like from the street and what it actually was became immediately apparent. The floor was clean concrete. The equipment was old but maintained with the kind of obsessive care that makes things outlast their intended lifespan by decades. There were photographs on the walls, bikes in various stages of construction, groups of men at various ages, a long timeline of something being built one piece at a time. A long wooden table sat in the center of the room that had clearly seen thousands of hours of work and meals and hard conversations and decisions that mattered. Sandra walked in slowly, taking it all in. Ethan walked beside her. This is where you build them, he said. Not a question. This is where we build everything, Jack said from behind them. They sat at the table. Roy brought coffee. Dale appeared from the back and sat at the far end with a notepad, not conspicuously. Just present. The way a person who manages details makes himself available without inserting himself. Castillo came in, took a cup, and stood against the wall with the quiet authority of a man who had been invited specifically as a witness and understood the weight of that role. Jack sat across from Ethan and Sandra. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them for a moment before he spoke. I'm going to tell you what I want to offer, he said, and then I'm going to tell you what it isn't. The second part is as important as the first. Ethan nodded. Full apprenticeship, Jack said. Under the 4 best custom builders I know personally. 2 of them are in this building right now. You'd work here with them learning the full craft. Framework, engine building, bodywork, fabrication. Not just repairs. Building from the ground up. He paused. Trade school tuition, fully covered. There's a program in Flagstaff, 3 of my people have gone through it. You'd attend 1 week a month, expenses paid, and work here the rest of the time. He glanced at Dale, who said a number quietly. Jack repeated it. The number was more than 3 times what Castillo was currently paying him. Ethan kept his face neutral. He felt his mother go very still beside him. Your mother's medical situation. Jack's voice shifted, more careful, more deliberate. I'm not going to insult either of you by calling what I'm offering charity. It's a structured medical support arrangement connected to the foundation my club runs. It covers specialists, ongoing treatment, medication costs. It's not unlimited, but it covers what the records show she currently needs, and then some. He looked at Sandra directly. You'd have access to doctors who aren't on a 6-week waiting list. You'd stop choosing between the medication and the groceries. Sandra's jaw tightened. Not offense. The particular effort of receiving something large and long-term, Jack said, bringing his eyes back to Ethan. If you do the work, if you prove yourself, over the next 2 years, I want to talk to you about a partnership stake in what we're building here. Not ownership, a stake. Real responsibility, real voice. Real skin in the game. He stopped. He let it sit. Ethan looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. You said there was a second part. There is. Jack's voice didn't change. This is not a reward. I need you to understand that clearly. Because if you take this thinking it's a reward, you'll spend the next 2 years feeling like I've already done enough. A pause. You haven't done anything yet. He held Ethan's gaze and didn't look away from it. What you did in that lot took 6 seconds. What I'm offering you requires 600,000 seconds. Minimum. It requires showing up when you don't want to. Learning things that will frustrate you. Being wrong repeatedly in front of people who are better at this than you are, and taking instruction from men twice your age who will not make it easy, because making it easy would be doing you a disservice. Ethan said nothing. You earned our respect before we met you, Jack said. But respect is not a free pass. It means I expect more from you, not less. It means when you make a mistake, and you will, I'm going to tell you directly, and I'm going to expect you to fix it. He sat back slightly. That's the deal. Both sides of it. The opportunity and the obligation. The room was quiet. Sandra's hand found Ethan's arm under the table. Not a grip, just contact, presence. Ethan looked at Jack and said, Can I ask you something first? Ask the man at Castillo's shop. The one who had the record, the drug history. The one Castillo gave a chance to when no one else would. Something shifted in Jack's expression. Subtle. Dale told me about him this morning. His name is Chris, Ethan said. He's 24. He's in Tucson. He's working at a fabrication shop. A pause. I took the job at Castillo's partly because I wanted to understand what that looked like. Someone deciding a person was worth the trouble when nobody else would. I wanted to work in a place that did that. Jack looked at him steadily and waited. I want to know. Ethan said, if what you're building here does that. Not for me. He paused. For people who don't have whatever it is I apparently have. People who haven't proved themselves yet. Who maybe can't yet. Who just need someone to decide they're worth the trouble. The silence in the room shifted quality entirely. Roy, standing near the wall, made no sound. But he looked at the floor for a moment, the brief, private look of a man who has just spent by something he was not expecting and needs a second to absorb it. What are you asking me? Jack said quietly. I'm asking if this, Ethan gestured at the building around him, vague but clear, is only for the people who've already proved themselves. Or if it's also for the people who haven't, who maybe never got the chance. Jack took a breath. Let it out slowly. That, he said, is the right question. And the honest answer is not yet. But that's what I want it to become. He held Ethan's eyes. That's part of why I want you here. Not just to build bikes. To help build something bigger than bikes. Ethan sat with that for a moment. Then he looked at his mother. Sandra was watching him with the expression she always had when she was deliberately not telling him what to do. The look of a woman who had learned over 18 years that this particular person needed to arrive at his own decisions through his own process. She was giving him the space. She always gave him the space. But he could see in her face what the medical support would mean. He could see the tiredness underneath her composure. Not the tiredness of today, but the accumulated tiredness of 5 years of fighting a system that did not make room for people who couldn't pay enough to be prioritized. The waiting rooms, the denied claims, the medications she'd quietly halved the doses of when the month ran short. He had never once heard her complain about any of it. He had simply watched it and carried it alongside her and told her he'd figure out the money situation the way he always did. He looked back at Jack. "I have one condition," Ethan said. Jack waited. "Castillo's shop." Ethan said it plainly. "Whatever partnership we build here, whatever this becomes, he's part of it. Not as a favor, because he's good and because he deserves it, and because he's been doing the right thing in a small shop on a hard street for 20 years, and nobody has shown up for him the way you showed up for me today." From the wall, Castillo made a sound, not a word. Something that wasn't quite ready to be a word yet. Jack looked at Ethan for a long moment, then at Castillo, then back at Ethan. "You're negotiating your own deal," Jack said slowly. "While accepting the deal, yes. For someone else's benefit, yes." Jack looked at Roy. Roy had his arms crossed and was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man who has just witnessed something that has confirmed every single reason he made the drive out here today. "All right," Jack said. He put his hand across the table. "Done." Ethan shook it. Then he looked at Castillo. The old man uncrossed his arms. He was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to mean something. Then he walked to the table and sat down for the first time since they'd arrived. He put his hands flat on the surface. He looked at Ethan with an expression Ethan had never seen on his face before. Not the steady competence of the shop. Not the contained pride of the morning outside on the sidewalk. Something older and less defended than either of those things. "You didn't have to do that," Castillo said. "I know," Ethan said. Castillo looked at the table, then back up. "Why?" Ethan thought about it for a second. "Because you gave Chris a chance when nobody else would. And nobody ever showed up to thank you for it." Castillo was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly in the way he'd nodded at the shop that morning. The private, confirming nod of a man who has received the answer he was looking for and knows exactly what to do with it. The coffee had gone cold. Nobody reached for it. Outside, somewhere down the road, the last of the motorcycle engines had gone quiet. The news vans were editing footage. The comments were multiplying. The 10 million view mark was still hours away, though none of them in that room knew it yet. What happened next was quieter than everything that had come before it. Jack asked Ethan questions about his work. Real questions. Technical ones. Specific enough that vague answers wouldn't hold up. What he understood about frame geometry. What he'd learned from the Indian carburetor. What he thought was wrong with the way most young mechanics were trained. Ethan answered directly, sometimes correcting himself mid-sentence when he realized he was approximating instead of being precise. At one point, Jack said, "You're going to fight with my lead builder, Tommy. Fair warning, he is not an easy man to learn from." "Has anyone learned from him?" Ethan asked. "Several. Then I'll figure it out." Jack's mouth moved. Almost a smile. "He said the same thing to me 20 years ago. Word for word." Sandra had been quiet through most of this, watching, absorbing. At one point, Roy brought her a fresh cup of coffee, and she accepted it with a thank you genuine enough that Roy looked briefly uncertain about what to do with his hands. Then she said, addressing Jack directly, "The medical support. How does it work? Who administers it?" Jack nodded at Dale, who walked her through the structure clearly and without condescension. The foundation, the affiliated physicians, the coverage tiers, the process for accessing specialists. Sandra asked 4 follow-up questions. They were precise and practical. Dale answered all of them without hesitation. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Jack. "I will not be a charity case," she said. Her voice was steady, not defensive. Stating a fact. "I will not be someone you take care of out of obligation." "You won't be," Jack said. "The obligation is to your son. The support for you is an investment in his stability. I need him focused. He can't be focused if he's watching you go through something preventable." He paused. "That's not sentiment. That's practical." Sandra looked at him for a long time. Then something in her face settled. Not softened, settled. The way a decision feels when you've been carrying the weight of it long enough and finally find somewhere solid to set it down. All right, she said. 2 words. Small. But they landed in that room with the weight of everything that had preceded them, every waiting room, every denied claim, every quiet, stubborn morning she had gotten up and kept going anyway. Ethan reached under the table and found her hand. She held his without looking at him, and that was enough. They stayed another hour, talked through timelines, logistics, the structure of the first weeks. At some point, Dale produced documents, not contracts exactly, more like frameworks, the kind of paperwork that memorializes good faith rather than attempting to legislate it. Ethan read everything. He asked about 2 specific clauses. Both questions were good ones. Dale adjusted the language on the second without being asked twice. When they finally stood to leave, Jack walked them to the door. At threshold, he stopped Ethan with a hand on the arm. Not grabbing, just stopping. One more thing. Ethan waited. The 4 men from the lot. Kingman PD has the footage and the identifications. It'll move through the system the way these things move. He paused. But I want you to know we found out who they are. None of them are from here. They came through. They're gone. His voice was flat and certain. They won't be back. Ethan held his gaze. He understood exactly what was being communicated. He understood that it was being communicated at precisely the right level, enough to be clear, not enough to require a response. Okay, he said. Jack nodded. He looked at Sandra. Safe drive home. Thank you, Sandra said. She looked like she wanted to say more and decided it wasn't necessary. Sometimes thank you is the whole thing, and adding to it only takes something away. They walked to Mrs. Peralta's Buick. Ethan held the door for his mother. She got in and looked up at him before he closed it. Ethan. Yeah. You negotiated for Castillo. Yeah. Before you negotiated for yourself. He looked at her. He needed it more than I did. She looked at him for a moment, the long, steady look that had no performance in it at all. The look she'd been giving him since he was small enough that he didn't yet understand what it meant. Then she reached up and touched his face. Brief, certain. The touch of a mother who has been doing this gesture for 18 years and intends to do it for many more. She said nothing. He closed the door. He walked around to the passenger side. He got in. They drove back toward Kingman in the quiet of the late afternoon. Neither of them spoke for several miles. The road was straight, and the light was going gold at the edges, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind that has nothing left to prove. His phone had 47 notifications. He put it face down on the seat. Behind them, in the building with the old floor and the long wooden table, Roy was already on the phone with the trade school in Flagstaff. Dale was drafting the formal paperwork. And Jack Mercer was standing in the middle of the shop floor, looking at a half-built motorcycle frame, thinking about something Ethan had said. For the people who haven't proved themselves yet, who just need someone to decide they're worth the trouble. He stood there for a long time. Then he walked to his desk, found a notepad, and wrote one line at the top of a blank page. He looked at it, capped the pen. It was the beginning of something. He didn't know yet exactly what shape it would take. But he knew the way he'd known very few things in his life, with complete certainty that the 18-year-old riding back toward Cayo Verde in an old Buick was going to be at the center of it. The day that had started with a tire iron in a vacant lot and 31 seconds of shaky phone footage had turned into something none of them had a complete name for yet. But it had turned. The first morning, Ethan showed up at Jack's building as an apprentice. He arrived 20 minutes early and stood outside the door waiting. Because nobody had told him the protocol, and he didn't want to assume. Tommy found him there. Tommy Reyes was 51 years old, built like someone who had spent 3 decades arguing with metal and winning most of those arguments. He had a face that suggested he had not yet decided whether Ethan Walker was a real person or a temporary inconvenience. And he looked at Ethan standing outside in the early morning, cold with the flat, assessing expression of a man who has seen a lot of promising young people, walked through that door and watched most of them decide. Within a few weeks, that promising wasn't the same as capable. "You waiting for an invitation?" Tommy said. "I didn't know the protocol," Ethan said. "Protocol is you come in when you're here. You're here. Come in." Ethan came in. Tom pointed at a partially disassembled engine block on the far workbench. "Tell me what's wrong with it." Ethan walked to it. He stood in front of it for 90 seconds without touching anything. He looked at it the way someone looks at a problem when they've learned that the first answer that comes to mind is usually the second best one. Then he said, "Cases are cracked. Right side, below the oil passage. Whoever ran it let it run dry." Tommy looked at him. "How long did it take you to see that?" "About 40 seconds. "And the other 50? Making sure I wasn't wrong." Tommy made a sound that was not quite approval and not quite dismissal. The particular sound of a man who has received a better answer than he expected and is not yet ready to acknowledge it. He turned back to what he was working on. "Don't touch anything today," he said. "Watch. Ask one question per hour. If you ask two, I stop answering." "Understood. And if you break something, you fix it. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs you." "Also understood." Tommy looked up at him one more time. Whatever he was looking for, he apparently found enough of it. He turned back to his work without another word. That was the beginning. The first month was the hardest thing Ethan had done since the year his mother was first diagnosed. Tommy was not cruel, but he was completely unsparing in a way that Ethan had not previously encountered. He corrected Ethan 12 times in the first week alone. 3 of those corrections came in front of other people, delivered without softening, without apology, without any of the cushioning that most people instinctively add when they're pointing out someone's mistake to an audience. Ethan took every one of them. He went home, looked up everything he'd gotten wrong, and came back the next morning knowing it cold. By the 3rd week, Tommy was correcting him 7 times. By the 6th week, 4. By the 2nd month, the corrections had changed in character entirely. They were no longer about fundamentals. They were about refinement. The distance between adequate and correct. The gap between something that works and something that was made right. One evening, late when everyone else had gone, and only the 2 of them remained, Tommy set down his tools and sat on the edge of the workbench and looked at Ethan in a way that was different from his usual surveillance. "You know what the difference is," Tommy said, "between a mechanic and a builder?" Ethan looked up from the frame he'd been measuring. "Tell me." "A mechanic makes something work," Tommy said. "A builder makes something that works the way it was always supposed to." He looked at the frame. "You're starting to build." He picked up his tools again without waiting for a response. Ethan said nothing, but he held on to those words in the particular way you hold on to the thing change the picture of what you thought you were doing. At Castillo's shop, meanwhile, the changes were quieter, but no less real. Jack had moved on the partnership within 2 weeks of the meeting at the building. Not a takeover, not a buyout, a genuine alignment, the kind that respects what was already there and adds to it rather than replacing it. Equipment upgrades that Castillo had been putting off for 6 years arrived in the space of 10 days. A 3rd bay went in. 2 additional apprentices joined the roster. One of them, and this was non-negotiable, Ethan had made it a condition of his own terms, came from the county's youth reintegration program. His name was Devin. He was 19 years old, had been inside for 14 months on a nonviolent charge, and had the kind of hands that already understood engines, even if nobody had yet taught them to be precise. Castillo put him on basic work. On the days Ethan was at the shop rather than the building, he worked beside Devin without making a production of it. One afternoon, Devin looked up from the brake line he was fitting and said, "You're correcting me, yeah," Ethan said. "You're like 20 years old, 19. "Same thing. It's not the same thing," Ethan said. 3 weeks ago, someone twice my age was correcting me 12 times a day, and I sat there and took every one of them. Devin was quiet for a moment. "Did it work?" "Starting to," Ethan said. Devin went back to the brake line. He did it the way Ethan had shown him. It was right the first time. He looked up. Ethan nodded. Devin did it again to make sure. That was how it went, day by day, The ordinary accumulation of small things done correctly that is the only way anything real ever gets built. The video, meanwhile, kept moving through the world in the particular way genuine things move when they find their audience. 50 million views came and went. A national magazine sent a writer to Kingman for 4 days and published a long piece that went well beyond the 31 seconds of phone footage, tracing the grocery bags and the free car repairs and the turned-down charity and the chosen apprenticeship, the full architecture of a life that had been building toward those 6 seconds long before the camera happened to be pointing. A morning news program flew Ethan and Sandra to New York. Sandra wore a blue dress Ethan had never seen before. When he said so on the way to the airport, she told him she'd bought it at a thrift store the week before the trip. He told her it looked like it cost $500. She said that was the point. They were on camera for 8 minutes. The host asked Ethan about the moment of decision, the 2-second pause, the choice to move, the thing that separated him from every other person within line of sight that afternoon. Ethan sat with the question longer than was comfortable for television, long enough that the host almost redirected. Then he said, "I don't think I made a decision. I think I just stopped not moving." The host paused. In television, that kind of pause costs something. What does that mean? It means the decision wasn't move or don't move, Ethan said. The decision was made a long time ago, somewhere I can't point to. In that moment, all I did was stop holding it back. The clip of that exchange got shared separately from the rest of the interview. It reached 3 million views in 48 hours. Jack watched it on his phone, standing between 2 half-finished frames in the building, and said nothing to anyone about it. But that evening he called Ethan. "I watched the interview," Jack said. "How bad was it?" "It wasn't bad." A pause. "The thing you said about stopping not moving." "Yeah, did you know you were going to say that?" "No, it just came out." "The true things do," Jack said. Then, without transition, "How's the panhead coming?" The panhead was a 1958 restoration, a frame-off rebuild of a machine that was older than most of the people who would ever see it finished. Tommy had assigned it to Ethan 6 weeks in, which was either a sign of confidence or a test designed to produce failure with Tommy. The distinction was not always immediately clear. "I'm close," Ethan said. "Another 2 weeks." "Tommy give you a timeline?" "Tommy doesn't give timelines. He says it's done when it's right." "And when do you think it'll be right?" 2 weeks, Ethan said again. Jack made the sound that was almost a laugh. "He said that same thing to me first time I gave him something like that, word for word." 16 days later, on a Tuesday morning, with most of the building's regular crew present, Ethan stood in front of the completed panhead and checked the primary chain tension one more time. Then the oil, then the magneto. He had checked all of these things 3 times already. He checked them again because Tommy had said it once and never repeated it, which meant he expected it to stick. The moment you trust your memory over your hands is the moment something breaks. Tommy was standing at the far wall, arms crossed, face arranged in its default expression of suspended judgment. Roy was there. Dale was there. Castillo had come from the shop. Devin stood in the back, still in his work clothes from the morning, standing up straight in the way people do when they understand they're witnessing something they'll remember. Ethan looked at Jack. Jack nodded. Ethan kicked it over. The engine caught on the second kick. The sound it made, there was no other word for it. Correct. Not just running. Correct. The particular note of a machine that has been put back together the way it was always meant to be. Every tolerance right. Every surface matched. The decades restored to function rather than just appearance. The sound of something that had been broken being genuinely whole again. Nobody spoke for 5 full seconds. And Tommy uncrossed his arms. Tommy said. Coming from Tommy, that was a standing ovation, and everyone in the room knew it. Jack put his hand on Ethan's shoulder and squeezed once and let go. Devin in the back started clapping. He was the only one who did it first. After a second, Roy joined him, then Castillo. Then the rest of the crew, one by one. Tommy not clapped, but his mouth moved in a way that, on a different face, would have been called a smile. On Tommy's face, it was simply the acknowledgement that something had been done correctly, which was rarer and therefore worth more. The panhead idled in the silence that followed the applause. Still running. Still correct. The sound of it filling the room the way something does when it belongs there. That evening, Jack called a meeting at the long wooden table. Nobody used the word meeting. The core people gathered. Roy, Tommy, Castillo, and Ethan and Jack set a folder on the table and opened it without preamble. "We've been talking," he said, "about what comes next. Not for the shop, not for the building, for the idea." He turned the pages so the others could see them. Plans, numbers. A proposal that had clearly been drafted carefully, worked over, revised more than once. A training program, Jack said, formally structured, affiliated with the trade school in Flagstaff, open to applicants who've been turned away from conventional programs. People with records, people aging out of foster care, people who've had enough wrong turns that the normal doors are closed. He looked at Ethan. "You talked about this in your first week here. You asked if what we were building was only for people who'd already proved themselves." Ethan remembered. "I've been thinking about it since," Jack said. "The answer I gave you was not yet. I think it's time to make it yet." The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something real is being proposed. Not politely quiet, actively quiet. The kind where people are listening with more than just their ears. "We're calling it the Walker Program," Jack said. "Named after you." Ethan looked at him. "I'd rather you didn't." "I know you would." Jack's voice was final but not unkind. "We're doing it anyway. You don't get to be humble about this one. The name matters because the story matters. People need to understand where it came from and why." Ethan looked at the table. He was 20 years old. He'd had his birthday 6 weeks into the apprenticeship, quietly, without making anything of it. And the idea of his name on something that would outlast him by decades was not something he knew how to receive without the particular discomfort of a person who does good things and genuinely cannot understand why that makes him noteworthy. But he thought about Devin, standing in the back of the room, clapping for the panhead, hands rough, from the work he was only starting to learn. He thought about Chris in Tucson, 24 years old, doing fine, the kid who needed one door to stay open when every other one was closing. He thought about all the people who needed one door, just one, who were currently standing in front of walls. "Okay, Jack said. Then Ethan looked up. "But I want Devin in the first cohort. He's not a project. He's exactly who this is for." Jack looked at Devin, who had gone very still in the way people go still when something large and unexpected turns in their direction. "You interested?" Jack said. Devin looked at Ethan, then at Jack. His jaw worked for a moment. He was 19 years old and he had learned in the 14 months he'd spent inside and in the months since to be careful about things that sounded good before he understood what they actually were. He was looking at Jack the way that particular wariness looks when it's trying to decide whether it's safe to put itself down. "Yeah," Devin said. "I'm interested." "Then you're in," Jack said. "First cohort." Devin nodded. He looked at the floor for a second. When he looked up again, something in his face had shifted in a way that was not going to shift back. Ethan recognized it. He'd felt something similar, standing on the sidewalk in front of 300 motorcycles, trying to understand why the world had just moved in his direction. The program launched 4 months later. 7 participants in the first cohort, each of them carrying a history that conventional institutions had decided made them a liability rather than a potential asset. They arrived on the first Monday with varying degrees of weariness. Some openly skeptical, some trying not to show it. One young woman who sat in the back and said nothing for the entire first day. Her name was Rhea. She was 22 years old. She had been in the foster system until 18. Had 2 years of homelessness after that. Had found stability through a caseworker who had heard about the Walker program from someone who had seen the original video online and passed the application along with a handwritten note that said simply, "She has the kind of hands that need to be doing something." Rhea had never touched a motorcycle in her life before she walked through the door. She sat in the back with her arms folded across her chest and her eyes moving over the room, over the equipment, the people, the photographs on the walls. Ethan standing at the front with the careful, measuring look of someone who has been promised things before and learned through hard experience that the promise and the reality are two different addresses. Ethan ran the orientation session. He stood at the front and looked at all 7 of them, and he didn't start with gratitude or inspiration. He started with the truth. "I'm not going to tell you this is easy," he said. "It's not. I'm not going to tell you it's fair that you're starting here instead of somewhere else. It's not." He paused. "What I'm going to tell you is that this program exists because someone believed that doing the right thing when nobody was watching is worth more than any credential you can put on paper. And if you're here, it's because we believe that about you. We're not doing you a favor. We're making a bet." He looked at each of them in turn. "You're going to be corrected constantly. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to make mistakes and fix them, and make different mistakes and fix those too. And at some point, he let it sit for a moment. You're going to make something that is genuinely right. And you will know it when it happens. Because it doesn't sound like anything else." The young woman in the back, Rhea, was watching him with complete, unreadable attention. "Questions," Ethan said. She shook her head, said nothing. She came back the next day, and the day after that. She came back every single day. And she came back the following Monday an hour early, which was the moment Ethan knew that what the caseworker's note had said about her hands was accurate. He didn't make a production of noticing it. He simply made sure she was put on progressively more complex work, the way Tommy had done with him, the way Castillo had done with Chris before that. Tommy noticed her within the first 2 weeks. He watched her work from a distance, the way he watched everyone, that steady, evaluative attention that could feel like pressure until you understood it was actually respect. He watched her make a mistake, watched her catch it herself before anyone pointed it out, watched her take the piece apart and start over without being told to. He walked over. "Do it again," he said. "I was already going to," Rhea said. Tommy looked at her for a moment. Then he walked away. He didn't correct her for the rest of that week. 3 weeks later, he told her directly, without cushioning, "You have the hands for this." Rhea looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means come back tomorrow," Tommy said. She did. She came back every tomorrow after that. The program ran its second cohort 8 months after the first. The third cohort came with a waiting list. Applications were arriving from 2 states over, forwarded by caseworkers and parole officers and teachers, and one retired judge in New Mexico who had seen the national magazine piece and written a letter by hand on legal stationery explaining 3 specific young people he believed in and why. Jack read every application personally. He had not expected to. He had planned to delegate that part. But the first batch arrived on his desk, and he sat down and started reading and did not stop until he'd gone through all of them. And he called Dale afterward and said he needed a larger table. By the time the original rescue video crossed 50 million views, a milestone that generated another round of coverage, another surge of interviews, another wave of applications to the program, the Walker program had placed 31 graduates into working positions at shops across Arizona and New Mexico. The foundations supporting it had received donations from people in 42 states. A tool manufacturer had donated a full equipment set after their CEO watched the morning news program interview and showed it to his board. A private donor from Phoenix, someone who had watched the video on a Sunday morning and apparently had both the means and the impulse to act on what it produced in him, had funded a second location. Jack told Ethan about the second location on a Friday evening. They were at the long table. The building was empty except for the 2 of them and the bikes in various stages of construction around the walls. Ethan opened the folder Jack slid across to him, looked at the proposed address. "The timeline, Tucson," he said. "It made sense geographically," Jack said. "It also makes sense because Chris is in Tucson." Jack looked at him steadily, said nothing. "You already thought about that," Ethan said. "It wasn't a question." "I thought about it," Jack said. "But it's your call, your relationship." Ethan looked at the folder. He thought about Chris, who he had spoken to exactly twice since the story went public. Once, when Chris had called out of nowhere, voice rough, saying he'd seen the video and it had made him think about Castillo, about what that chance had meant, about what he wanted to do with what it had given him. Ethan had listened, had said very little, had said one thing at the end, quietly, "Call me when you're ready to do something with it." He picked up his phone and called. 3 rings. "Ethan," Chris said, "you said call you when you were ready." "I said that, I'm calling you." A pause. Longer than a few seconds. Long enough that Ethan could hear Chris working through something on the other end of the line. "What is it?" Chris said finally. "Tucson. Second location of the program. I want you running it with me." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Ethan would have thought the call dropped if he hadn't heard Chris breathing. "I'm not qualified," Chris said. "That's not what I asked you." Another pause. Shorter this time. The kind that happens when someone has already made the decision and is just catching up to it. "Yeah," Chris said. "Yeah, I'm ready." "Good, I'll send you the details this weekend." He hung up. He looked at Jack. Jack was watching him with the expression Ethan had come to know over 2 years, the particular quality of attention that meant the older was seeing something that confirmed what he'd believed from the very beginning. From the moment in the vacant lot when he'd looked up from the ground and seen a face already decided. "You know," Jack said, "most people in your position would be thinking about what they built. The program, the numbers, the second location." "I am thinking about that," Ethan said. "You're thinking about Chris," Jack said. Ethan shrugged slightly. "Chris is the point of the whole thing." Jack was quiet for a moment. The panhead sat finished against the far wall, chrome catching the evening light. Outside somewhere, a truck downshifted on the road. The building settled around them with the quiet of a place that has absorbed years of serious work and holds it the way good wood holds warmth. "You know what I wrote on that notepad?" Jack said. "The night you went home after that first meeting." "No," Ethan said. Jack reached into the folder. Behind the documents for the Tucson location, at the very back, there was a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the table. Ethan picked it up. 4 words, in Jack's handwriting, at the top of an otherwise blank page. "Find more like him." Ethan set it down. He looked at it for a moment without speaking. "Did you?" he said finally. "I started with one," Jack said. "You keep finding the rest of them." That was the thing. Ethan was beginning to understand, not fully yet, but in the way you start to understand something that is still larger than your ability to hold it all at once. The Walker program wasn't built on the 6 seconds behind the Texaco station. It was built on everything before that. Every ordinary morning when nobody was watching. Every grocery bag. Every free repair job on a Saturday. Every time he'd said no to the help he needed because someone else needed it more. Every hour at the harder job in the better place. The program was the long version of the tire iron. The same impulse applied to something that could outlast a single afternoon. The first cohort's graduation was not ceremonial in the way graduations usually are. There were no gowns, no speeches about potential and futures. Jack had decided that the marker of completion was a finished piece of work. Each participant built something from a strip frame, start to finish, over the course of the program. The finished machines sat in a row on the morning the first cohort ended. 7 machines, 7 different hands, 7 different levels of finish and refinement, because people are not uniform, and the program had never pretended otherwise. But all of them complete, all of them running, all of them the result of someone who had been told, in various ways and by various systems, that they were not capable and had quietly proved otherwise. Devon's bike was the third in the row. He'd chosen a frame that was more complex than what Ethan had suggested he start with. Ethan had said so. Devon had said he wanted to try anyway. Ethan had looked at him for a moment and then said, "Okay, then you'll fix every mistake yourself." Devon had said that was fine. The bike ran on the first kick. Devon stood there and listened to it and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked at Ethan. "You knew I could do it," Devon said. "Before I did." "I knew you had the hands," Ethan said. "Tommy told me the same thing once." I didn't believe him until the panhead started. Devon looked at the bike. "What does it feel like when you finally hear it right?" Ethan thought about it for a second, like something that's been holding its breath a long time, finally letting it out. Devin nodded slowly. He put his hand on the tank and left it there, for a moment, the way you touch something you made, to confirm it's real. Ria's bike was at the far end of the row. She had come in an hour early on the final day to do one last check, not because she doubted it, but because Tommy had told her in week 3 that the final check on the final day was the most important one, and that the people who skipped it were the same people who had already mentally moved on before the work was done. She had not skipped it. When the engine turned over, she walked to the corner of the building, and stood there for a full minute with her back to the room. Nobody said anything. Tommy looked at the ceiling. Roy looked at his boots. Jack watched the back of her shoulders and said nothing. When she turned around, her face was composed. Completely composed. The only evidence of anything was a slight brightness in her eyes that she made no effort to conceal. She walked back to her bike. She put her hand on it. She looked at Ethan. "What's next?" she said. Ethan almost smiled. "Tommy has a frame he's been saving." "For who?" "For whoever finishes first and asks what's next." Ria looked at Tommy. Tommy met her eyes. "Monday," he said. 7 o'clock, I'll be here at 6:45, Ria said. "I know," Tommy said. And that was the graduation. In the weeks that followed, as the Tucson paperwork was being finalized and Chris was preparing to relocate, something else was happening that none of them had anticipated. The coverage of the Walker program, the follow-up pieces, the updates to the original story, the interviews with graduates, the photographs of the 7 finished bikes in a row had begun to generate response of a different kind. Not donations, not applications, though both continued to arrive. Something more direct. People were calling the shop, not to inquire about motorcycles, to ask if they could help. Mechanics offering time. Suppliers offering materials at cost. A retired fabricator from Colorado who had watched the National Magazine piece and called Dale's number on a Thursday afternoon to say he had 30 years of knowledge he hadn't passed on to anyone, and he was running out of time to do it. He was 67 years old and his name was Gerald, and he had a voice like someone who had spent decades talking to engines rather than people, which made him, in Dale's opinion, exactly right for the room. Jack called Ethan that evening. "You know a Gerald Marsh?" Jack said. "No," Ethan said. "You do now." A pause. "He called this afternoon. Wants to teach. Volunteer basis. Says he's been watching what we're doing and wants to be part of it before his hands give out." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd call him back after I talked to you." "Why after you talked to me?" "Because," Jack said, "this is your program. The name on the door is yours. I fund it and I believe in it, but you run it. And I don't add people to it without talking to you first." Ethan sat with that. The idea that the name on the door was his was still something he was adjusting to, still something that felt slightly wrong in the way that things feel wrong when they're larger than the container you've built for your own sense of yourself. "Tell him yes," Ethan said. "Tell him to come in Monday and talk to Tommy first. If Tommy thinks he has something to give, he stays. And if Tommy doesn't," Jack said. "Then Tommy doesn't," Ethan said. "But I don't think that's going to happen." It didn't happen. Gerald arrived Monday. Spent 4 hours working alongside Tommy without either of them saying more than 20 words combined. And at the end of it, Tommy told Jack by text, not call. Text, because Tommy had developed a specific and targeted use of technology that Gerald could stay. Gerald stayed. He was there 3 days a week for the next 2 years. He taught things Tommy hadn't taught, the older methods, the techniques that predated the tools the program had access to, the foundational understanding of material and form that made the difference between someone who could build a machine and someone who understood why it was built the way it was. He was patient in a way that Tommy was not, and blunt in a way complemented Tommy's directness without duplicating it. The second cohort had 8 participants. The third, 12. The waiting list for the fourth was longer than the list of available spots. One evening, Jack found Ethan in the building after everyone else had left. Ethan was at the long table with a stack of applications, the fourth cohort going through them the way Jack had gone through the first batch, personally, one at a time. He had a pen in his hand. He was making notes in the margins. Jack pulled out a chair and sat down. "How many?" Jack said. 43 applications, Ethan said. 12 spots. Jack said nothing for a moment. He watched Ethan move through the pages with the focused, careful attention of someone who understands that each piece of paper represents a person who is waiting to find out if a door is going to open. "You going to read everyone?" Jack said. Ethan said, without looking up. "Everyone." Jack put his elbows on the table. "That's going to take you most of the night." "Probably." Ethan turned a page. "Go home, Jack." "I've got it." Jack didn't move. He sat there for a moment longer, watching this 20-year-old kid with grease still on his hands from the afternoon's work, sitting alone at the long table, reading 43 stories about 43 people who needed one door to open, deciding which 12 would get it. "You know," Jack said quietly, "when I put your name on this program, you told me you'd rather I didn't." "I remember," Ethan said. "You still feel that way?" Ethan stopped. He looked at the application in his hand. A 21-year-old from Flagstaff, 2 years on the street. A caseworker's note that said he'd taught himself basic engine repair from YouTube videos on a library computer. He looked at the margins where he'd written, "Strong hands, self-taught, follow up on references." "No," Ethan said. He set the page down and picked up the next one. "I don't feel that way anymore." Jack nodded. He stood up. He put on his jacket. He was almost to the door when Ethan spoke again without looking up from the application. "Jack." "Yeah, the notepad, the 4 words you wrote." A pause. "Find more like him." Ethan turned a page. "That's what this is. Every single application." Jack stood at the door for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "that's exactly what it is." He walked out. The door closed behind him. Ethan kept reading. Outside, the night had settled in full. The road was quiet. Somewhere in Tucson, Chris was in the middle of his second week running the new location, sending Ethan texts at odd hours about logistics and participants, and one particular young man who had shown up uninvited on the first day stood in the doorway and said he'd heard what was happening and wanted to know if there was room. Chris had texted, "What do I do with someone who shows up uninvited and asks straight like that?" Ethan had texted back, "You let him in." In the building, Ethan moved through the applications with his pen and his careful margins, page by page, one story at a time. He was 20 years old. He had 43 decisions to make. He made them the way he made everything, without rushing, without looking for shortcuts, without ever once confusing being thorough with being slow. He finished at 11:47. He stacked the pages, capped his pen, turned off the light. He walked home. The night was cool and the road was empty, and he was tired in the good way, the way that comes from doing something that mattered on a day when it needed to matter. He thought about Devin's bike running on the first kick. He thought about Rhea standing in the corner with her back to the room sim, composing herself. He thought about Gerald's hands, 67 years old, demonstrating a technique that nobody in the room had seen before. And the way the participants had gone quiet, watching him the way people go quiet when they understand they're seeing something that won't be available to see for much longer. He thought about the 43 applications and the 12 spots and the 31 people who would get a letter this week saying not yet, which was not the same as never, and which he intended to make sure they understood was not the same as never. He thought about the 6 seconds. He had stopped thinking of them the way the world thought of them, as the event, the moment, the origin point of everything that came after. He understood now what they actually were. Not a beginning, a confirmation. A single visible moment in a long, unbroken line of moments that had been happening, quietly and without audience, since long before any camera was there to catch them. The tire iron was just the most recent version of the grocery bag. The apprenticeship application, the free repair on a Saturday, the turned-down charity. Every ordinary choice made in the dark, with no one watching, that had been building slowly and without fanfare toward the person who had stood in front of 43 strangers' stories tonight and taken every single one of them seriously. The 6 seconds were real, but the walking home, the pen in the margins, the door held open for the next person, and the one After that, this was the thing they'd been pointing toward all along. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not a text, not an email. An actual letter in a cream envelope with a return address from a law firm in Phoenix that Ethan didn't recognize. He found it mixed in with the shop's regular mail when he came in that morning. His name handwritten on the front in the kind of deliberate script that meant someone had taken time with it. He set it on the workbench and didn't open it for 2 hours. He had learned over the past year that things arriving unexpectedly in formal packaging were rarely simple. They were either very good or they required a lawyer, and he didn't yet have one of those, which meant the first category was preferable. He finished the break assembly he was working on. He cleaned his hands. He picked up the envelope. Inside was a single page, a law firm letterhead, 3 paragraphs, and at the bottom, a dollar figure that made him read the page twice from the beginning to make sure he had understood what he was reading. A private foundation unnamed in the letter, represented through the firm, was offering a grant to the Walker program, not a donation. A grant structured over 5 years with no stipulations beyond continued operation and annual reporting. The figure was enough to fund 3 additional cohorts simultaneously, cover the Tucson location's operating costs for 2 years, and establish a small endowment that would keep the program running even if all other support disappeared. Ethan put the letter down on the workbench. He stood there for a moment. Devin was in the third bay fitting a chain. The sound of it was familiar and grounding. Somewhere in the back, Castillo was on the phone with a parts supplier, the calm, unhurried negotiation of a man who has been doing this long enough that he no longer needs to perform patience, he simply has it. Ethan picked up his phone and called Jack. "Read me the firm name," Jack said, when Ethan had explained. Ethan read it. A pause. "I know that firm," Jack said. "They represent Marcus Hale." "Who is Marcus Hale?" "He's the private donor from Phoenix, the one who funded the Tucson location." Ethan was quiet for a second. "He's doing it again." "Apparently," Jack said, "on a significantly larger scale." "Why, that's what I'd like to know," Jack said. "Can you be in Phoenix Thursday?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "I can be in Phoenix Thursday." Marcus Hale turned out to be 63 years old, white-haired, with the kind of handshake that communicated decades of intention behind it. He met them in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown. 2 members of his foundation's staff present, and a view out the windows that Ethan made a point of not thinking too hard about. "I've been watching what you're building," Hale said. He had the direct, uncluttered manner of someone who had spent a long time in rooms where vagueness was a liability. "Since before the Tucson location. Since the first cohort finished. Why didn't you reach out then?" Ethan said. "Because I wanted to see if it was real," Hale said. "A lot of things look good in the first year. The question is the third year, the fourth. Whether the people running it still care as much when the cameras have moved on and the donations have leveled off and it's just work." Ethan looked at him. "And Ann," Hale said, "I've spoken to 9 of your graduates in the past 6 months, independently, without telling them who I was or why I was asking." He paused. "Every one of them said the same thing. Not the same words." "The same thing, what thing?" Jack said. Hale looked at Ethan. "That you treated them like the outcome mattered. Not like a program statistic. Not like a success story you needed for the annual report. Like the actual person in front of you mattered." He set his hands flat on the table. "That's rarer than money. That's why I'm here." Ethan sat with that for a moment. He was 20 years old in a 14th floor conference room with a man who was offering him enough money to change the shape of everything they'd built. And the reason he was being offered it was because 9 people he hadn't spoken to in months had told a stranger the truth about what they'd experienced. "I want to understand the structure," Ethan said. "The reporting requirements. What you need from us." Hale nodded. He looked at one of his staff members, who opened a folder and began to walk through it. Ethan listened to every word. He asked 4 questions. 2 of them were good enough that Hale's staff member looked at Hale briefly before answering, the involuntary glance of someone recalibrating their expectations of who they're in the room with. An hour later, walking out of the building, Jack said. You know, most 20-year-olds would have said yes before he finished the sentence. I know, Ethan said. Why didn't you? Because I needed to understand what we were agreeing to. The money doesn't matter if the structure is wrong. Jack looked at him sidelong. The structure wasn't wrong. No, Ethan said. It wasn't. He paused. That's why I said yes. Jack made the almost lost sound. Tommy's right about you. Ethan looked at him. Tommy said something about me? Tommy doesn't say things about people, Jack said. He said something about your work. 2 weeks ago. I happened to overhear it. What did he say? Jack was quiet for a step or two. He said the panhead was the best restoration that room had ever produced. Another pause. He said it like he was annoyed about it. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the sidewalk. That might be the best thing anyone's ever told me. I know, Jack said. That's why I'm telling you now instead of earlier. They drove back to Kingman. The road was straight and long, and the afternoon was clear in the way Arizona afternoons are clear in autumn. The light precise and unambiguous. Ethan called Sandra from the passenger seat and told her about the grant in the straightforward way. He told her everything, the facts first, then what they meant, then the question of what to do about it, in that order. She was quiet through all of it. Mom, he said. I'm here, she said. I'm just thinking. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, she said slowly, that you were 7 years old and you found that kid in the neighborhood who was eating lunch alone every day. You started bringing 2 sandwiches to school every day for 4 months. I didn't find out until your teacher mentioned it. Ethan said nothing. I'm thinking, Sandra continued, that this is the same thing, just bigger, just with more sandwiches. She paused. I'm proud of you, Ethan. I'm proud of you every single day, and I don't say it enough. You say it enough, he said. I don't, she said, but I'm going to try harder. He looked out the window at the road. How are you feeling, honestly? Better, she said. The new specialist is it's different. Having access to someone who actually knows my case. It's different. A pause, and in that pause was everything she didn't say, which was more than what she did. I feel like I can breathe again. I hadn't realized how long I'd been holding it. Ethan looked at his hands. The calluses on his palms from the work. The faint scar on his left forearm from the pipe fitting. The hands of someone who had been building things. Good, he said. That's good, Mom. Come for dinner Sunday, she said. I'm making the rice thing you like. I'll be there, he said. He hung up. He looked out at the road for a while. Jack, driving, didn't say anything. He had the gift rare in people who had strong opinions about most things of knowing when silence was the right contribution to a conversation. The grant announcement went out the following week through the Foundation's communications team, a straightforward press release that described the program, the grant structure, the number of graduates, the locations. It generated another round of coverage. This one felt different from the earlier waves, less focused on the original story, more focused on what had grown from it. Journalists who came to Kingman now were less interested in the tire iron and more interested in Devin, in Rhea, in Gerald, teaching techniques that had no YouTube tutorial because they predated the internet by 40 years. One reporter, a woman from a long-form publication who spent 3 days at the building, wrote a line that Ethan would think about for years afterward. She wrote, "The Walker program is not a redemption story. It is a multiplication story. One person who did the right thing, quietly and consistently, for long enough that it became a template other people could follow." Tommy read the piece. He said nothing about it directly, but he cut it out of the printed magazine, with scissors and taped it to the wall above his workbench, which was where Tommy put the things that he considered permanently correct. It hung there next to a technical diagram from 1962 and a photograph of a frame he had built in 1987 that he still considered his best work. When Rhea saw it there, she stopped and read it. Then she looked at Tommy. "Did you put that up?" she said. "It's accurate," Tommy said. He didn't look up from what he was working on. Rhea looked at the clipping again. "It's about Ethan. It's about the work," Tommy said. "Ethan knows the difference." She looked at the clipping one more time. Then she went back to her bench. The fourth cohort's first day arrived on a cold Monday in November. 12 participants. The longest gap between application and acceptance the program had seen, because the fourth cohort had been the first one where the number of applicants had forced evenings making calls not to accept people, but to tell them personally, one at a time, that they hadn't made this cohort and why and what they could do to strengthen their application for the next one. He had insisted on doing it himself. Dale had offered to have the foundation staff handle the calls. Ethan had said no. That's 43 calls, Dale had said. 31, Ethan said. 12 got in. Still, I know how it feels to wait for a door to open, Ethan said. The least I can do is be the one who tells them it's not yet. He made the calls over 2 evenings, sitting at the kitchen table in the house on Cayo Verde, the same house. Though it no longer looked the same from the inside, small improvements accumulated over 2 years. The water pump finally fixed. The porch light at Mrs. Peralta's replaced and replaced again. The kitchen repainted on a Sunday afternoon when Sandra had said she'd been meaning to do it for 3 years. He made 31 calls. He was on the phone for 4.5 hours the first night and 3 hours the second. He remembered something from each call. 3 of the 31 cried. He stayed on the line with all 3 until they were done. He wrote notes after each call, specific to the person, what they'd said, what they should work on, what to remember when the next cohort opened. Devin, who had graduated from the first cohort and was now working full days at the building as a junior instructor, found Ethan at the table after the second evening's calls, still with the notepad open. You look like you just ran a marathon, Devin said. 31 calls, Ethan said. 31 reasons someone's not getting in this time. Devin sat down across from him. He looked at the notepad. You write notes on all of them? So I remember who they are when the next application comes in. Devin was quiet for a moment. He had been quiet in a different way than he used to be. The wariness that had been in when he first arrived had not disappeared, but it had been joined by something else, something that knew its own ground. He looked at Ethan with the careful directness of a person who has something to say and is deciding whether this is the right time to say it. What? Ethan said. I've been thinking, Devin said, about what you told me that first day, that we weren't a charity, that you were making a bet. He paused. I think I finally understand what you meant. Yeah, Ethan said. You weren't betting on whether we could do the work, Devin said. You were betting on whether we'd care enough to do the work right. Those are different bets. Ethan looked at him for a moment. Yeah, he said, they are. Tommy makes the same bet, Devin said. Every time. He just makes it in a different language. Ethan almost smiled. Don't tell Tommy he and I have anything in common. He'll deny it, Devin grinned. The real kind. I know. He stood up. Get some sleep. Fourth cohort starts in 2 days, and Rhea already rearranged the tool storage system because she said the old layout was inefficient. Ethan looked up. Did she tell Tommy? She told Tommy after she'd already done it. Ethan waited. He looked at it for about 5 minutes, Devin said, and then he said it was better. Ethan put his pen down. Tommy said it was better. He said, and I'm quoting directly, marginally improved, which for Tommy is a standing ovation, Ethan said, which is what I told Rhea, and she looked like she might actually pass out. Ethan laughed. The real kind, the kind that doesn't have anything performed about it. Devin left. Ethan closed the notepad. He sat at the table for another few minutes in the particular quiet of a house at night when the day's work is done and tomorrow's hasn't started yet. He thought about the fourth cohort. 12 people who didn't yet know each other, who would arrive Monday with varying degrees of wariness and hope and the specific guardedness that comes from having been let down by systems that were supposed to be on your side. He thought about what he'd said to the first cohort, standing at the front of the room. I'm not going to tell you this is easy. He thought about whether there was anything else he needed to say this time. Anything he'd learned in the year since that was worth adding. He decided there was one thing. He arrived Monday 15 minutes before anyone else. He put coffee on. He stood at the front of the room and waited while the 12 participants filed in over the course of 20 minutes. Some arriving together, most arriving alone. finding seats with the careful spatial awareness of people who haven't yet decided how much room they're allowed to take up. He waited until all 12 were settled. Then he said, "Last year I told the first cohort two things: that this isn't easy, and that it isn't fair that you're starting here instead of somewhere else. Both of those are still true, and I'm not going to repeat them because you already know them." He paused. "What I want to add this time is something I didn't know to say last year. It took me 12 months to understand it well enough to put it into words." The room was quiet. All 12 of them were watching him, the kind of attention that has not yet decided how much to invest. "The work will teach you something about yourself," Ethan said. "Not about engines, about yourself. What you do when something is harder than you expected. Whether you go back and fix it or you find a way to live with it being slightly wrong. Whether you ask for help when you need it or you'd rather fail alone than admit you don't know something." He looked at them. "The machines don't lie. They either run right or they don't. And the difference almost always comes back to a choice you made when nobody was checking." He could see it landing differently for different people. One young man in the front row had gone very still. The way people go still when something has touched the exact place they hadn't expected to be touched. A woman near the back had her eyes down, but her pen was moving. She was writing something. And she was writing fast. "Questions," Ethan said. "What if we don't figure out how to fix it?" said the young man in the front row. Ethan looked at him. "Then you figure it out slower. Nobody here has a deadline except the one the work sets." A pause. "What's your name?" "Marcus," the young man said. And then, seeing Ethan's expression shift for just a second, "Not the same Marcus, I'm guessing." Ethan's mouth twitched. "No, but it's a good name. I have one of those." He looked at the room. "Let's get started." The fourth cohort was different from the first in ways Ethan hadn't anticipated. The first cohort had been cautious, guarded, slow to trust the structure they'd been handed. The fourth cohort came in faster, not overconfident, but with a different relationship to the possibility that this might be real. Word had traveled, not through media coverage, but through the graduates themselves, through Devin's presence in the building, through Ria's reputation in two different cities, through Chris running the Tucson location with a directness and a care that had already produced its own reputation separate from the original story. The fourth cohort knew what it was walking into in a way the first cohort hadn't, and that changed the dynamic in ways both easier and more demanding. The questions were harder, the mistakes were faster, and the recoveries were faster. By the third week, Tommy told Jack privately that this was the strongest group they'd had. Jack told Ethan. Ethan said, "Don't tell them that yet." Jack looked at him. "Why not?" "Because the thing that's making them strong is that they're still working like they have something to prove. If you tell them they're doing well, some of them will ease up. The ones who ease up are the ones who needed to hear it most." Jack was quiet for a moment. "When did you get this smart about people?" "I'm not smart about people," Ethan said. "I'm smart about this particular thing, because Tommy did the same thing to me, and I only understood it afterward." Jack nodded slowly. Then he said, "There's something else I need to tell you." His voice had shifted in a way Ethan recognized the particular register of someone who has been carrying information and has decided the time has come to set it down. "What?" Ethan said. "I've been approached," Jack said, "by 3 other cities. Organizations who want to replicate the model. Not license it, not franchise it. They want guidance on how to build their own version of what we built, independently, locally, rooted in whatever community they're in." He paused. "Albuquerque, Denver, Memphis." Ethan was quiet. "I've been sitting on this for 3 weeks," Jack said, "because I wanted to think it through before I brought it to you. Because this is a different scale than what we've been talking about. And because your name is on this, and anything that comes next has to involve you at the center of it, not at the periphery." Ethan looked at the building around him, at the work in progress on every bench, at the photographs on the walls, the accumulated evidence of years of serious effort. He thought about the 43 applications. He thought about the 31 calls. He thought about the young man named Marcus in the front row, who had gone still, When Ethan said the machines don't lie, what do they need from us? Ethan, time, Jack said. Knowledge. Someone who's done this to tell them how the first year actually goes, not how it looks from the outside. What the mistakes are, what not to do. He paused. You'd need to travel. Not constantly. But enough. Who would run the fourth cohort while I'm gone? Devin and Rhea, Jack said. Together. Ethan looked at him. You've already talked to them. I wanted to know if it was feasible before I brought it to you, Jack said. So I asked them if they could handle it. What did they say? Devin said yes immediately, Jack said. Rhea said she needed to think about it for 1 hour. Then she came back and said yes. Ethan said nothing for a moment. You prepared for this, Jack said. You've been preparing for this since the first cohort, whether you knew it or not. Devin and Rhea running a cohort without you isn't a risk. It's the point. It's what the whole thing was supposed to produce. Ethan sat with that. He understood what Jack was saying. He understood it the way you understand something that you already knew, but hadn't said out loud, and hearing someone else say it makes real in a different way. Albuquerque first, Ethan said. Why Albuquerque? Because it's closest. Because if we make mistakes in the first one, I want to be close enough to fix them fast. He paused. And because the organization there, I've looked them up. They've already got infrastructure. They're not starting from nothing. They just need someone to show them how the rooms should feel. Jack looked at him. When did you look them up? 2 weeks ago, Ethan said, when I heard them mentioned at the foundation meeting. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then, you knew I was going to bring this to you. I knew you were sitting on something, Ethan said. You've been doing the almost a smile thing more than usual. You do that when you're waiting to say something. Jack's mouth moved in exactly the way Ethan was describing. You've been watching me that long? You taught me to pay attention, Ethan said. Did you think I was only going to apply it to engines? Jack made the almost law sound. Then he sobered. There's one more thing. He reached into the folder he'd been carrying. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and set it in front of Ethan. It was an email, printed out, from a high school in Tucson. The subject line was, Request Student Speaker. Ethan read it. A teacher at the school had written to the Walker Program Foundation address, explaining that she had a class of juniors and seniors, 16 and 17 years old, many of them from circumstances similar to the ones the Walker program served. She wanted to know if someone from the program would come and talk to them. Not about motorcycles, about choices, about what it looks like to be young and have very little and still decide every single day what kind of person you're going to be. She had ended the email with one line that had no professional distance in it at all. She had written, some of my students have stopped believing that the way they start is not the way they end. I need someone who can make them believe otherwise. Ethan read it twice. Then he looked up. That's Chris's city, he said. It is, Jack said. Send her Chris. Ethan said, he's the one they need to hear. Not me. I grew up, whatever the world thinks of where I grew up. I had my mother. I had Castillo. I had a foundation under me. Chris started with nothing. He lost 2 years. He rebuilt from a harder floor than I ever stood on. He paused. Those kids will hear something different from him than they'd hear from me. And they need to hear something different. Jack looked at him for a long time. You know, Jack said, most people, when they're offered the stage, take it, I know, Ethan said. But it's not my stage. I just helped build it. There's a difference. Jack took the email back. He looked at it. He looked at Ethan. And then he picked up his phone and called Chris. Chris answered on the second ring. Yeah. You have a school in your city that needs a speaker, Jack said. A teacher with juniors and seniors who've stopped believing in themselves. A pause. Ethan wants it to be you. The silence on the other end lasted about 3 seconds. Why me? Chris said. Because, Jack said, you know what it looks like when everything has gone wrong and you still find a way back. Ethan's words. Another silence, longer when, Chris said. Jack looked at Ethan. Ethan held up 3 fingers. 3 weeks, Jack said. We'll send you everything you need. I don't need anything, Chris said. I'll figure out what to say on the way there. Jack hung up. He looked at Ethan. He's going to be good at this. I know, Ethan said. He's been good at things since Castillo opened the door. He just hasn't had enough room to show it. That evening, Ethan stopped at the corner store on the way home. He bought the usual rice, a can of tomatoes, a bar of dark chocolate for his mother. He stopped at Mrs. Peralta's porch and checked the light, which was burning steadily. He stood there for a second, looking at it, thinking about the fact that he had replaced that bulb 4 times in 2 years and had never once thought of it as anything except a thing that needed to be done. He knocked on her door. She answered after a moment. Still in her day clothes, a woman in her 70s, with careful eyes and a way of watching people that missed very little. "Ethan," she said, "it's late." "Not very late," he said. "I just wanted to check on you." She looked at him with the expression she had worn the day she found out it was him buying the groceries, a mix of warmth and something that was not quite exasperation, but lived in the same neighborhood. "You have been on the television 3 times, she said, "and you are standing at my door checking on a light bulb." "The light bulb's fine," he said. "I'm checking on you." She looked at him for a moment. Then she opened the door wider. "Come in. I have coffee." He went in. He sat at her kitchen table for 45 minutes. She asked about the program, about Sandra, about the young man Devin, who she had met twice and liked immediately. She told him about her granddaughter in Phoenix, who was thinking about a trade program, and asked whether Ethan thought it was a good idea. He said yes without qualification and told her 3 specific reasons why. When he left, she walked him to the door and put her hand on his arm for a moment. "Your mother," she said, "called me last week." Ethan looked at her. "She wanted to thank me," Mrs. Peralta said, "for being someone nearby, someone who watched out." She paused. "I told her she had it backwards." He looked at her. "I told her," Mrs. Peralta said, "that it was your son watching out for me, not the other way around." She let go of his arm. "You have been a good neighbor, Ethan Walker, since before anyone knew your name." He walked home in the dark. The air was cool. The road was quiet. His phone had 6 notifications he hadn't checked since noon, which was unusual and which he noticed and then consciously decided not to address until morning. Some things kept. The morning was soon enough for most of what the world sent his way. He thought about Albuquerque, about what it would feel like to walk into a room in a different city, with people who didn't know the story yet, and try to explain not the 6 seconds, but what came before them. What made them possible? The long, unglamorous preparation of a person who had decided, somewhere along the way, what kind of person they were going to be, and had simply kept being that person, day after day, whether or not anyone was watching. He thought about the email from the teacher in Tucson. "Some of my students have stopped believing that the way they start is not the way they end." He thought about himself at 16, walking the 40-minute route home from wherever he'd been, knowing every crack in the pavement, knowing which yards had dogs, carrying things, not complaining, not because complaining wasn't allowed, but because it didn't occur to him that it would help. He thought about the way the panhead had sounded on the morning it started. Correct. The particular note of something restored to what it was always supposed to be. He thought about Tommy's single word, He thought about 31 phone calls and 31 sets of notes in a notepad that was now full and had been replaced with a new one. He thought about Rhea, standing in the corner of the building after her bike started, composing herself with her back to the room while nobody pretended not to notice. He thought about Devin saying, "You knew I could do it before I did." He thought about Jack's 4 words on a blank page, "Find more like him." And he understood, in the quiet of the walk home, that this was what the work actually was, not the program, not the buildings or the grants or the coverage. The work was the finding, the looking at a person really looking, with the full weight of your attention, without the filter of their history or the convenient shorthand of what had gone wrong for them, and seeing what was actually there, what had always been there, what just needed someone to decide it was worth the trouble. That was the 6 seconds, extended over years. That was the tire iron, translated into something that outlasted any single afternoon. He got home. The light in the kitchen was on. Sandra was still up, which was unusual, And when he came through the door, she was at the table with a cup of tea and a look on her face that he recognized as the prelude to something she'd been waiting to say. "Sit down," she said. He sat down. She put both hands around her cup and looked at him for a moment. "The specialist called today," she said. "The results from last week's scan." He didn't say anything. He waited. "They're good," she said. Her voice was steady and certain. "They're better than good." She said the word responding. She stopped. She said, "I'm responding." Ethan put his elbows on the table. He looked at his mother. She was looking at him with that same careful, exact expression she always had when she was trying to be precise rather than emotional, because precision was how she trusted herself to get through things that were too large for her to feel all at once. "Responding," he said. "She said it's early," Sandra said. "She said we don't get ahead of ourselves." But she also said, and here her voice did something small, a slight variation in steadiness. That was the closest Sandra Walker got to letting it go, that she hasn't seen numbers like mine in a patient who started where I started in quite some time. Ethan looked at the table. He was quiet for a long moment. "The specialist you have access to now," he said. "The one through the foundation." "Yes," Sandra said. He nodded once. He looked at his hands. "Mom," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not going to say I know," she said again. "You don't have to say it." They sat at the table in the quiet of the kitchen, the sound of the neighborhood settling around them, and didn't say anything for a while. They didn't need to. The thing that needed to be said had been said. And the thing underneath it, the 2 years of early mornings and long drives and decisions made in rooms and on sidewalks and at kitchen tables, didn't need words. It had already said itself. In every morning, Sandra had woken up and found a door open that wasn't open before. In every appointment that happened without a 6-week wait. In every medication that was there when she reached for it. Ethan made them both tea. He sat back down. He told her about Albuquerque. He told her about the teacher in Tucson in the email and Chris. He told her about the 4th cohort, about Marcus in the front row going still, about Rhea rearranging the tool storage and Tommy's response. She listened to all of it with the complete attention she gave, everything he told her. When he finished, she said, "The young man in the front row. Marcus, the one who went still." "Yeah," Ethan said. "He's the one you need to watch," she said. "The ones who go still like that, they're the ones who are already deciding." Ethan looked at her. "Deciding what?" "What kind of person they're going to be," she said. "The same decision you made a long time ago in a place you can't point to." She paused. "You said that on television. I've thought about it every day since." He looked at her. "You were 7, she said quietly. "When you started bringing 2 sandwiches." She set down her cup. "I think you knew then." He didn't answer that. He didn't have an answer for it. He stayed until almost midnight. He helped her with the dishes, because she always washed the dishes at night, regardless of how tired she was, and he had long since stopped arguing with this and simply started helping. They talked about Mrs. Peralta's granddaughter, about the program in Flagstaff, about a conversations Sandra had had with a woman at her medical appointments whose son was the same age as Devin, and who had asked Sandra, with the directness of someone who had nothing left to lose by asking directly, where she should send him. Sandra had given her the program's number. She had not mentioned it to Ethan until now. He looked at her. "When was this?" 3 weeks ago, Sandra said. "I wanted to see if he called before I said anything." "Did he call?" "He called Dale yesterday," Sandra said. "His name is Terrence. He's 20. He wants to apply for the 5th cohort." Ethan dried the last dish and set it down. "You've been doing intake work," he said. "I've been having conversations," Sandra said, "with people in waiting rooms, in parking lots." She looked at him with the direct, unapologetic expression of a woman who knows exactly what she's doing and is not interested in being talked out of it. "People talk to me, they always have. I listen." A pause. "I thought the least I could do was point them somewhere real when they needed it." Ethan looked at his mother, standing at the kitchen sink, practical and certain, in the kitchen of the house on Cayo Verde, telling him that she had been finding people for the program for 3 weeks without mentioning it because she wanted to wait and see if it stuck. He thought about Tommy's clipping on the wall. The Walker program is not a redemption story. It is a multiplication story. He thought about the 4 words on the notepad. Find more like him. He understood, standing in that kitchen, that Jack had written those 4 words about Ethan. But Ethan was beginning to understand that they described his mother more precisely. She had been finding more like him her entire life. She had just been doing it from waiting rooms and parking lots instead of from buildings with long wooden tables and photographs on the walls. Mom, he said. Don't make it into a thing, she said. She handed him the dish towel. I'm just talking to people. You're not just talking to people, he said. She looked at him. Then she looked away. The brief, calibrated look of a woman who is pleased but has decided that acknowledging it would be making it into a thing. Go home, she said. You have a cohort in the morning. He went home. He had a cohort in the morning. Terrence called Dale on a Wednesday and showed up at the building the following Monday without waiting to be formally accepted. Ethan was in the middle of a frame measurement when Devin came to the back and said, "There's someone at the door. Says his name is Terrence. Says he has an application in, but couldn't wait." Ethan set down the measuring tape. How does he look? Devin considered this for a second, like someone who decided something and didn't want to give himself time to undecide it. Ethan knew that look. He'd worn it himself once, standing outside a door in the early morning cold, waiting for someone to tell him the protocol. Send him in, Ethan said. Terrence was 20 years old, broad-shouldered, with the careful posture of someone who had learned to make himself readable as non-threatening in rooms full of strangers. He came in and stood just inside the door and looked at the building, at the benches, the tools, the frames. Devin watching him from across the room, and then he looked at Ethan. You're him, Terrence said. I'm Ethan, Ethan said. You're early. My mom said if I was going to do this, don't wait for them to tell you to start. He paused. She talked to a woman named Sandra in a parking lot 3 weeks ago. Ethan looked at him for a moment. Your mother give you good advice, Ethan said. Usually, Terrence said, when I listen. Then you're already ahead of most people. Ethan nodded toward the far workbench. There's an engine block on that bench. Tell me what you see. Terrence walked to it without hesitation. He stood in front of it for a long moment, not rushing, not performing, just looking. Then he said, cracked casing, left side, and someone tried to fill it before it was cleaned properly. You can see the repair compound over contaminated metal. Ethan was quiet for a second. How do you know what repair compound over contaminated metal looks like, he said. I've done it wrong twice, Terrence said, on my uncle's truck. Had to redo both times. He glanced at Ethan. Is that a problem? Ethan said. That's exactly right. The people who've never made the mistake don't know what it looks like. He looked at Devin. Get him a bench. Devin got him a bench. That was how Terrence entered the 4th cohort on a Monday morning, 3 days before the cohort's official second week, without a formal acceptance letter, because he had listened to his mother, and his mother had listened to Sandra Walker in a parking lot outside a medical building. And Sandra Walker had been paying attention to people in waiting rooms for 3 weeks before she mentioned it to anyone. The chain of it, Ethan thought, when Devin told him later how the morning had gone. The invisible chain of it, every ordinary conversation that looked like nothing from the outside, but was actually something moving in a direction. The Albuquerque trip came 2 weeks later. Jack drove. Roy came. Ethan sat in the back with a folder of notes he had made over the previous 10 days, not a presentation, not a speech, just observations. What the first week actually felt like. What mistakes were inevitable and which ones were preventable. What Tommy had taught him about the difference between a correction and an instruction. What Devin had taught him without knowing he was teaching it, simply by coming back the second day when he had every reason not to. The organization in Albuquerque was run by a woman named Patricia Chen, 54 years old, who had been running workforce development programs for disadvantaged youth for 22 years and had the particular combination of idealism and hard-earned pragmatism that comes from doing that work without quitting. She met them at the door of her building with a handshake that communicated she had been waiting for this meeting for longer than the 3 weeks since she'd first reached out. "I've watched every interview," she said to Ethan, leading them inside. "Read every piece. But I want to know what didn't make it into the articles." "Most of it didn't make it into the articles," Ethan said. "That's what I figured." She sat them down at a table and put coffee in front of everyone without asking if they wanted it. "Start from the beginning, not the video. Before the video." So Ethan started from the beginning. He told her about Castillo's shop and the 8 months before the vacant lot. He told her about Chris and why that story mattered more to the program than his own. He told her about Tommy and the 12 corrections in the first week and what it took to sit through them without defending yourself. He told her about Devin arriving with wariness thick as a coat and what it looked like the morning that coat started to come off. He told her about Rhea and the hour early on, the first Monday, and what Tommy meant when he said, "You have the hands for this." He talked for 40 minutes without a break. Patricia Chen asked 2 questions. Both of them were good. Neither of them were about the video or the motorcycles or the Hells Angels or any of the things that people usually asked about. The first question was, how do you keep the people who succeed from leaving the program the moment they have options? Ethan said, "You don't keep them. You make them want to stay because the work is worth staying for." Devin had a job offer from a shop in Scottsdale 6 months after he finished the first cohort. Better money, he turned it down. He paused. I asked him why. He said, "Because he wasn't done learning." I said, "Done learning what?" He said, "How to teach it." That's when I knew he was going to be an instructor. Patricia wrote that down. The second question was, what do you do when someone fails? Not quits. Fails. Makes the same mistake enough times that the reasonable conclusion is that this isn't the right fit for them. The room went quiet in a different way. Ethan looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her. That happened once in the second cohort. A young man who had the desire but not yet the patience the work requires. He was rushing every piece, not cutting corners consciously. He just moved faster than his hands could learn at that point in his life. "What did you do?" Patricia said. "I sat down with him," Ethan said, "alone, and I told him what I saw. Not what he'd done wrong. What I saw in him, that he was someone who needed to be moving, who got frustrated when the learning was slower than his ambition. That wasn't a flaw. It was a mismatch between where he was and what this particular work required at this moment." He paused. "And I told him to come back in a year, that the program would be here, that the door wasn't closing, it was just not yet." "Did he come back?" Patricia said. "Not yet," Ethan said, "but he called Dale 6 months ago. He's been working construction, learning to be patient with large-scale physical problems that require sustained attention. I think he's building toward it. On his own timeline." A pause. "Not everyone's yet is the same length." Patricia looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Jack. "How old is he?" Jack said. Patricia looked back at Ethan. "I've been doing this work for 22 years, she said. "And what you just described, that specific distinction between a door closing and a not yet, is something it took me a decade to learn how to communicate." She paused. "How did you know that?" Ethan thought about it. "Because someone said it to me," he said, in different words, "a long time ago." He didn't say more than that. He didn't need to. They spent 4 hours in that building. By the end of it, Patricia had 11 pages of notes, and Ethan had 2 more for his folder. Things she'd said about her own program's failures that were accurate and useful, and that he was going to bring back to Devin and Rhea, because they were things worth knowing before they became necessary. On the drive back, Jack said, "She's going to build something real." "I know," Ethan said. "You gave her a lot," Roy said from the passenger seat. "She already had most of it," Ethan said. "She just needed someone to confirm she was right about the parts she was second-guessing." Jack glanced at him in the rear view. "Is that what you think you did?" "That's what I know I did," Ethan said. "The 22 years was already there. We just compared notes." He looked out the window at the road going past. The folder was on the seat beside him, 2 new pages added. He thought about Patricia's 11 pages of notes. He thought about what those notes would become. over the next year, the year after that. The rooms that would eventually exist because of them. The people in those rooms who didn't yet know those rooms were being built. The chain of it. The invisible, unglamorous, ordinary chain of it. He got home late. The house was quiet. He sat at the kitchen table for a while before going to bed. Not with his phone, not with the folder, just sitting. The particular stillness of a person who has had a full day and needs a few minutes at the end of it to let it settle into something he can carry. His phone buzzed once. A text from Chris. School visit was today. Ethan picked up the phone. He waited. 3 seconds. Then they stayed an hour after the bell. Teacher cried. Twice. Then one kid came up after. Said he has a cousin who aged out of foster care and needs something real to do. I told him to have the cousin call Dale. Ethan put the phone down. He looked at the ceiling. Then he picked the phone back up and typed. How did it feel? He waited. Longer this time. Almost 2 minutes. Then Chris wrote, like something I didn't know I needed to do until I was doing it. Ethan read that twice. Then he wrote back, that's the one. That feeling right there. That's the whole thing. He put the phone down. He went to bed. He slept without his phone for the first time in months. 3 weeks after the Albuquerque visit, the letter arrived that none of them had seen coming. Not a law firm this time. Not a grant. A letter from the governor's office. Formal. Specific. An invitation for Ethan Walker and Jack Mercer to meet with the governor of Arizona to discuss the possibility of state-level funding and formal recognition for the Walker program as a model workforce development initiative. Dale brought it to Ethan at the building, set it on the bench in front of him without saying anything. Let him read it. Ethan read it once, then he set it down. Then he picked it up and read it again. When, he said. They're proposing 2 weeks from Thursday, Dale said. Can you move it to 3 weeks? Dale looked at him. You want to delay a meeting with the governor. The 4th cohort has their mid-program review that Thursday, Ethan said. I'm not missing it. Dale said nothing for a moment. Then he said, I'll make the call. He made the call. The governor's office moved the meeting. Nobody at the governor's office was informed of the reason, but Dale suspected that if they had been, it would not have surprised them. Ethan told Jack about the letter that evening. Jack was quiet for a long time. State recognition means state oversight, Jack said finally. Some of it. Are you ready for that? No, Ethan said. But neither was I ready for the 1st cohort, or the Albuquerque meeting, or the grant, or any of it. Ready is something you get to after you've already started. He paused. That's what Tommy taught me. You don't wait until you're certain. You check your work 3 times and then you kick it over. Jack looked at him. I'm going to say something, Jack said, and I want you to hear it properly. Okay, Ethan said. 2 years ago, I was on the ground in a vacant lot, outnumbered, bleeding, and I watched 10 people look at me and look away. His voice was even, factual. And then you came around that corner, and you didn't look away. And I have been asking myself since that day, what made the difference? What in a person produces that? Whether it can be taught, or whether you're born with it, or whether it's something built so slowly and so quietly that by the time you need it, you don't even recognize it as something you chose. Ethan said nothing. I think I know the answer now, Jack said. It's none of those things, and it's all of them. It's every ordinary day. Everything you did when the only person who knew was you. He paused. The governor can recognize the program. The grant can fund it. The cameras can find it. But none of that made it. You made it. Every morning long before any of this, in the dark, when it didn't count and didn't show and didn't matter to anyone except you. Ethan looked at the building around him. At Tommy at the far bench, working with his particular focused intensity. At Devon, running a young woman through a brake adjustment, patient and precise. At Terrence at the 3rd bench, moving carefully, no longer rushing, 3 weeks in and already learning the difference between speed and hurry. Jack, he said. Yeah, thank you for getting off the ground. Jack looked at him. I mean it, Ethan said. You got up. You came back. You did all of this. A different person in that lot could have gone home and let it go, and I never would have known the difference. He paused. The 6 seconds weren't only mine. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Nobody's ever said that to me before. Because it's not the kind of thing that makes a good clip, Ethan said. But it's true. Jack looked at the floor, then back up. His face had the quality it got sometimes in unguarded moments, less the chapter president, more the man underneath that, the one who had spent 4 decades building something, because he believed that the way people treated each other when it was hard was the only thing that actually mattered. All right, Jack said. He cleared his throat. Don't get sentimental on me. I'm not sentimental, Ethan said. I'm accurate. Jack made the almost law sound. He walked to the far bench and picked up a wrench and started working without another word, which was exactly right. The mid-program review happened on Thursday as scheduled. Ethan ran it the way he ran everything directly, without softening, with full attention to each person in the room. He sat with each participant for 20 minutes individually, alone at the long table, and he asked them 2 questions. What is going well, and what is not going well yet? He used the word yet specifically and deliberately. It was Tommy's word. He had borrowed it without asking and intended to keep it. Terrence sat down across from him and said, before Ethan could ask the first question, I know what you're going to ask. What am I going to ask? Ethan said. What's not going well yet? Terrence said. And the answer is patience. I know it. I feel it every time I have to redo something. I want to be done before I'm done. Ethan looked at him. What do you do with that feeling? I put it down, Terrence said. I pick up the piece and I start over. And I keep the feeling somewhere I can look at it later. A pause. Devin told me to treat impatience like information instead of an enemy. So I'm trying that. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Devin said that, he said. Last week, Terrence said, when I was about ready to throw a gasket across the room. Ethan looked at the table. Devin had said that. Devin, who had come in with his wariness and his 14 months behind him and his hands that already understood engines before anyone had taught them to be precise. Devin had found a way to pass something forward before Ethan even knew he was doing it. That's good advice, Ethan said. Use it, I am, Terrence said. After the last individual review, Ethan sat at the table alone for a few minutes. The building had the particular sound it got in the late afternoon engines cooling, tools being put away, conversations tapering toward the end of the workday. Through the far door, he could hear Devin and Rhea talking about tomorrow's schedule, the practical, easy shorthand of 2 people who had learned to work together without friction. He thought about the governor's meeting. 3 weeks from Thursday, he had been thinking about what to say, turning it over the way he turned over a problem before he spoke about it, looking at it from different angles, making sure he wasn't approximating, making sure that when he opened his mouth, the words that came out were the precise ones. He knew what the governor's office wanted. They wanted a success story, numbers, graduates placed, dollars returned to the economy through reduced recidivism, through employment, through tax revenue, from people who were now earning wages, instead of cycling through systems that cost more to maintain than they produced. All of that was real, and all of it was documentable. And Dale had already prepared a clean summary of it that would satisfy every metric a policy conversation required. But Ethan also knew that the numbers weren't the point. The numbers were the evidence. The point was something harder to put in a policy document. He picked up his phone and called Sandra. She answered on the second ring. How was the review? Good, really good. Terrence is going to be fine. He's learning to treat impatience like information. Where did he get that? Devin. Sandra was quiet for a second. Devin said that, apparently. Last week, when Terrence was about to lose it over a gasket. He paused. Mom, I need your help with something. What kind of something? The governor's meeting. I know what Dale's going to present, the numbers, the outcomes, the economic case. All of that is right and it matters. But I want to say something else in that room. Something that explains why the numbers are possible. And I can't find the right words for it. Sandra was quiet for a moment, long enough that he could hear her thinking. Do you remember, she said, when you were 9 years old and you found that bird with the broken wing in the backyard? Ethan said nothing. He remembered. You spent 3 days trying to fix it, Sandra said. You made a splint out of popsicle sticks. You looked up what to feed it. You got up twice in the night to check on it. A pause. And it died anyway. On the third morning, Ethan said. And you cried, she said, which I expected. But then you did something I didn't expect. You went back outside and you looked for another one. Her voice was even, precise. Not because you thought you could fix it, because you thought there might be one you could. A pause. That's the thing you need to say in that room. That the program exists because some people, when they find something that needs fixing, don't walk away just because the last one didn't make it. They go back outside and they look. Ethan held the phone against his ear. The building had gone quiet around him. The last of the afternoon traffic was passing outside. Somewhere down the building, Devon was locking a tool cabinet. The familiar clank of it, the everyday sound of a place where work happened seriously and repeatedly and without a lot of ceremony. That's it, Ethan said. That's exactly it. I know, Sandra said. How do you always know? Because I've been watching you go back outside and look your entire life, she said. I just never had the words for it either. Until right now, he was quiet for a moment. The specialist, the scan results, responding. How are you actually feeling? I feel like I can make plans, she said. And that sentence, the particular weight of those 7 words, everything they contained about every year, she hadn't been able to say them, landed in his chest and stayed there. That's new. I hadn't realized I'd stopped making plans until I started again. He closed his eyes for a second. Make plans, he said. Make a lot of them. I intend to, she said. Sunday dinner. I'm making the rice thing. I'll be there, he said. He hung up. He sat in the quiet of the building for another few minutes. Then he got up, got his jacket, said goodnight to Devon and Rhea, who were still talking schedules by the door, and walked out into the evening. The governor's meeting happened 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, in a conference room that smelled of fresh coffee and the particular formality of rooms where decisions get made that affect a lot of people who are not in the room. There were 6 people besides Ethan and Jack, 2 policy advisors, a workforce development director, a communications staff member, and the governor herself, a woman in her early 60s who had a handshake as direct as Patricia Chen's and eyes that moved through a room with the practiced attention of someone who had learned to read what people were actually saying underneath what they were saying. Dale presented first, clean, comprehensive, exact. Numbers and outcomes and economic projections and the replication model. Albuquerque, Denver, Memphis. The phone call Patricia Chen had made last week, saying the Albuquerque program was 6 weeks from launching its first cohort. Then the governor looked at Ethan. I've read everything, she said. I've seen the numbers. I want to hear from you what the numbers don't say. Ethan looked at her. He thought about the bird with the broken wing. He thought about Sandra saying, I feel like I can make plans. He thought about Tommy's single word on the morning the panhead started. He said, the numbers say how many people completed the program and where they went afterward. What they don't say is why those people came in the first place. Why someone with a record and a closed door and every reason to stop believing in the possibility of a different outcome walks through a door that promises them work and corrections and no guarantee of anything except that someone in the room is paying complete attention to who they actually are. He paused. They come because they heard from someone, a graduate, a caseworker, someone's mother in a parking lot, that in this particular room, a person is treated like the outcome matters. Not like a statistic that needs to land on the right side of a spreadsheet, like a person whose specific shape of history and ability and potential is worth understanding before you decide what they're capable of. He looked at the governor directly. State funding would let us do more of that. It would let us reach more rooms, more people, more cities. But the thing that makes it work, the actual mechanism, isn't the grant or the equipment or the trade school affiliation. It's the decision, made fresh every morning by every person who walks in that door and everyone who's waiting for them, to treat each other like the outcome matters. You can fund infrastructure. You can't fund that. That has to already be there. The room was quiet. The workforce development director looked at her notepad. The communications staff member had stopped typing. The governor looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then she said, "The program." "Whose name is on it?" "Mine," Ethan said. "I didn't choose that. Do you think it's right?" "I think," Ethan said, "that the name should belong to the first cohort, all 7 of them. But I understand why it works the way it does, and I've made my peace with it." He paused. "The name on the door is mine. The thing the door opens to belongs to everyone who walked through it." The governor nodded slowly. "Mr. Walker," she said, "if I told you that the state was prepared to offer funding sufficient to establish 5 additional locations across Arizona over the next 3 years, what would your first concern be?" "Speed," Ethan said immediately. She raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Moving too fast dilutes the thing that makes it work," he said. 5 locations in 3 years sounds like success. But if you open 5 locations and the people running them haven't had enough time to understand what they're building, not the logistics, the thing underneath the logistics, then you have 5 buildings with tools and benches and a name over the door, and you don't have 5 programs. He paused. "I'd rather have 3 locations built right than 5 built fast." The governor looked at her policy advisors. Both of them had their pens down. "3 locations," the governor said. "Built right, yes," Ethan said. She looked at Jack. "Do you agree?" "He runs the program," Jack said. "I agree with whatever he tells me to agree with." The governor's mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile and was not quite not one. "3 locations," she said, "over 4 years. With full autonomy over the selection and training of site leadership. And quarterly meetings with my workforce development office, not to direct you, to learn from you." She paused. "Can you agree to that?" Ethan looked at Jack. Jack said nothing. He was looking at the ceiling with the expression he had worn on the morning the pan had started. The morning Devin graduated, the morning Rhea walked back from the corner of the building and said, "What's next?" The expression of a man watching something he built do exactly what it was built to do. "Yes," Ethan said. "We can agree to that." They shook hands. The meeting ended. They walked out of the building into the cool morning air, and Jack stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at the sky for a second in the way he did when he was processing something large. "3 locations," Jack said. "3," Ethan said. "Built right." Jack looked at him. "Tommy's going to have opinions about who runs them." "Tommy always has opinions," Ethan said. "That's why his opinions are worth listening to." Jack almost smiled. "I'll let you tell him." "You're the chapter president," Ethan said. "And you run the program," Jack said. "Tommy works for the program." Ethan looked at him. "That conversation is going to take a while." "I know," Jack said. He started walking toward the truck. "I'll buy the coffee." The news about the state funding moved through the program the way things moved through the program, not through announcements, but through people. Devin heard it from Dale. Rhea heard it from Devin. Tommy heard it from Rhea, which meant he heard it approximately 30 seconds after Devin did, because Rhea had gone directly to Tommy's bench and told him because she understood that Tommy found out things better when they came straight, rather than arriving secondhand. Tommy's response, when Rhea told him, was to put down his tools and look at the wall for 10 seconds in complete silence. Then he said, 3 locations. 3, Rhea said. "Built right," Tommy said. That's what he said. Tommy picked up his tools again. He worked for about 30 seconds. Then he said, without looking up, he said that to the governor. "To the governor's face," Rhea said. Tommy made the sound. The one that was not quite approval and not quite anything else. The one that over 2 years, everyone in the building had learned to translate correctly. "Good," Tommy said. Rhea went back to her bench. Devin was at the door of the building that evening when Ethan came back from Phoenix. He was waiting, which Devin didn't usually do. He was not a person who waited when there was work available, and when he saw Ethan's face, he said, "It went well." "It went well," Ethan said. 3 locations? Devin said. 4 years. Built right. Devin nodded. He looked at the building behind him, at the sound of the last machines being shut down for the evening, the familiar winding down of a day of serious work. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About the 3rd location," Devin said. "After Albuquerque and Denver. Wherever it is." He paused. "I want to run it." Ethan looked at him. Devin held his gaze. He had the direct, grounded expression of someone who has thought about something long enough to stop being nervous about saying it out loud. I know I'm 21. I know I've only been instructing for 8 months. I know there's more I need to learn. He paused. But I also know what it's supposed to feel like in that room. I know it because I sat in the chair on the first day and I felt it. And I know I can make it feel that way for someone else. A pause. That's what you told the first cohort. That the program was a bet. I'm telling you, I'm worth the bet. Ethan said nothing for a long moment. He was looking at Devin the way Tommy had once looked at him, the full, unfiltered assessment of someone deciding whether what they're seeing is what they think they're seeing. Tell Tommy what you just told me, Ethan said. Devin blinked. Tommy. If you can say that to Tommy, and he doesn't tell you to come back in 3 years, Ethan said, then yes, the third location, yours. Devin's jaw tightened. Not fear. The particular compression of someone taking on a weight they've been asking for and now feel the actual size of. Okay, he said. He went to tell Tommy. Ethan didn't follow. He waited outside the building for 11 minutes. Then Devin came back through the door. Well, Ethan said. Devin looked at him. He said. Devin paused, recalling the exact words with the precision of someone who understood their importance. He said, come in Monday at 6. You have work to do before I can say yes. And then he turned back to what he was working on. Ethan looked at him. Devin, that's yes. Devin was quiet for a second. Then that's yes? That's Tommy's yes, Ethan said. You'll know his no when you hear it. It sounds completely different. Devin looked at the door of the building, then back at Ethan. And for a moment, just a moment, the wariness that had been in him 2 years ago on his passed across his face, not as itself, but as a memory of itself, the shadow of who he had been when he didn't yet know what he was capable of. Then it was gone. 6 o'clock Monday, Devin said. 6 o'clock Monday, Ethan said. Devin went home. Ethan stood outside the building for a while longer. The evening had settled fully. The road was quiet. Inside the building, Tommy was still working. He could hear it. The steady, unhurried sound of a man who had no interest in stopping before the thing he was working on was right. He thought about the day the panhead had started, the second kick, the particular note of correct. He thought about Tommy's and what it had meant and how long it had taken him to understand that the word contained everything Tommy was capable of giving, and that it was therefore not a small thing, but the largest thing Tommy had. He thought about Devin's face 11 minutes ago, taking on the weight of the thing he'd asked for. He thought about Rhea saying, "What's next?" before she'd finished wiping her eyes. He thought about Chris in Tucson on a Thursday in a high school classroom, talking to kids who had stopped believing that the way they start is not the way they end. And those kids staying an hour after the bell because something in what he said had reached the place in them that needed to be reached. He thought about Terrence treating impatience like information. He thought about Patricia Chen with 11 pages of notes and 6 weeks until her first cohort. He thought about Sandra in a parking lot listening. He thought about Marcus Hale watching a video on a Sunday morning and then doing something about what it produced in him. He thought about Mrs. Peralta's porch light burning steadily. He thought about the notepad. Find more like him. He thought about the 4 words and what they had become over 2 years, not a mission statement, not a slogan, but a practice enacted daily, in rooms and parking lots and phone calls and reviews and conversations at kitchen tables at night. The ongoing work of looking at people with complete attention and finding what was actually there, not what their history said was there, not what the system had decided was there, what was actually, specifically, irreducibly there. He thought about the 6 seconds, and he thought about what they were. Not courage, not heroism, not a decision made in a dramatic moment by someone built differently from other people. They were the visible surface of something invisible. The one moment where the long, quiet work of being a certain kind of person became impossible to miss. The tire iron was just the most recent instrument. The music had been playing for years. The heroes are not made in 6 seconds. They are revealed in 6 seconds. They are made in every ordinary moment. Before that, in every choice made in the dark. In every act of quiet decency performed, not because someone is watching, but because some people, the ones worth building programs around and naming buildings after and riding 300 motorcycles across a city for, cannot do anything else. They are made in grocery bags carried to a neighbor's door and called practice. In free repairs on Saturdays. In turned down charity. In chosen hard jobs at better places. In phone calls to people who didn't get in, made personally, one at a time, because they deserved to hear a voice instead of a form letter. In 31 pages of notes in a full notebook. In 6 o'clock Monday mornings. In what's next. In the specific weight of I feel like I can make plans, said by a mother who had stopped making them without knowing it, starting again. Ethan Walker walked back through the door of the building. Tommy was at the far bench, working. He didn't look up. Ethan picked up a wrench. He started working. And in that building, in that city, in the quiet accumulation of ordinary moments that were never ordinary at all, the thing that had started with a tire iron in a vacant lot and 31 seconds of shaky phone footage continued to do the only thing it had ever been doing. From the very beginning, it continued to find more of them, one by one, in the places nobody was watching, in the people nobody had yet decided were worth the trouble, in the rooms that existed because someone once had decided not to walk away. That was the story. That had always been the whole story, and it was nowhere near finished.